I'll call tonight. I'll call tonight's meeting to order. Today is March 25th, 2024 meeting of the ASCC. Call the roll.
Commissioner Breen?
Here.
Commissioner Flynn?
Here.
Chair War?
Here.
Commissioner Chung can't join us this evening. I understand Commissioner Dixon should be attending.
Okay.
You should expect her soon.
Let's go ahead and get started.
All right, thank you. Would you like to move to oral communications?
Yes, I will.
Okay. Just taking a look at our attendees. One moment. I see one hand.
I have a comment, oral communications, because it was earlier than a month ago that we lost our beloved colleague, Dave Ross. It was wonderful that the Planning Commission acknowledged that he is no longer with us, but I just want everyone to know that he is not with us, and he died on February 16th and is sorely missed by the entire town.
Thank you, Dana. Seeing nobody here. Oh, Craig?
This is just an update on the agenda. If you look at the commissioners, you've got some of the planning commissioners and some of the ASCC on there. So just make sure that it gets corrected before it gets finalized. Sorry, I mean, just we get it all squared away.
I appreciate it. Thank you. I apologize. I think I was trying to form some sort of super commission with half PC and half ASCC. So my apologies. And the minutes will reflect the correct commissioners. Sorry about that.
I figured I could be Nicholas Targ, except I'm a little short. Yeah, I think that would have been fun. Thank you.
All right.
Uh,
Okay. So what we do have one person with their hand raised
Great.
over Zoom. So Rita, please go ahead.
Well, first I'll start saying that I'm so happy that you're having a meeting tonight. And yes, Dana, thanks for bringing up our loss in the community of Mr. Ross. That's a real loss to the community, very active volunteer. I just want to say that I was very happy at the Planning Commission meeting last week to hear the voices of the ASCC. And you are so relevant and needed in this town. Thank you for all that you do. And just keep being active and keep having meetings, because we have a lot going on. And no matter if people say there's nothing to be put on the agenda, all you have to do is go outside, and there's lots to be put on the agenda. And we really appreciate the difference that you make in our town. Thank you.
Rita. Okay. Next on the agenda is our first item is the communication, or the referral from the Planning Commission. Adrian, do you have a short report, or can we move directly into comments about the ordinance?
I do have a staff presentation. It's pretty much the same one I presented to PC last week. So I'll go through that. If
That'd be
that sounds
great.
okay? Okay.
It includes the images.
Yes, it does. Just give me one moment. I'm just going to share my screen. All right, so this evening, the ASCC is meeting in a workshop style session to go over the zoning code and zoning map amendments as a group, put together a series of comments, feedback that will be forwarded on to the Planning Commission. So quickly, meeting format, I'll give my presentation. We'll move to commission questions. We'll take public comment, and then the commission will begin their workshop discussion. So the purpose, engage in a workshop style session along with staff and consultants to work through this review of the draft. And then we'll compile that feedback for the next meeting. We'll go over what's to come in terms of meetings over the next little while. So this is the whole technical team that's been working on the draft amendments. Myself, John Biggs, our interim planning and building director, he's beginning his transition out of the town, so he doesn't have any hours left to even attend this evening, but he's been working away with us over the past few months. Catherine Engberg, our interim town attorney, one of her staff members, Christy Bascom, she's a planner. She's been helping out as well. Monica Sidlick is here with us this evening. She's from Lisa Wides Consulting. She's really been running with this thing for us, working through the drafts, listening to us staff through all the iterations. And then Monica's colleague, Roger Eastman as well. He's not able to join us this evening, but he helped us as well. So I just want to take you through a little bit of background to frame sort of where we began and where we are this evening. So the Planning Commission adopted a resolution recommending approval of the housing element, and this was on December 20th. Council came together on January 24th of this year and adopted the housing element. In short order, just a few days later, we submitted to HCD. And then on January 30th, they deemed our housing element in substantial compliance with state housing element law. In that letter that they sent to us, they urged us to continue timely and effective implementation of all of our housing element programs. So on March 20th, last Wednesday, Planning Commission met. They had a very full discussion. I think we were here until about 11:20. They made lots of suggestions to staff and consultants, but ultimately they decided they wanted to expand the review process, get some more town input. And what they wanted to do was begin with having ASCC sit down and do their own independent review. They're specifically looking for guidance, technical guidance on the objective design and development standards proposed for the new multifamily and mixed use zoning districts. And then the next step Planning Commission envisions is meeting on April 3rd, along with ASCC in a joint meeting to go over all of this feedback together and sort of make a decision on what the final recommendation should be. And then Planning Commission would like to meet one more time and to consider, hopefully at that time, to make a recommendation of approval to Town Council. So I wanted to go over this briefly, just to sort of explain what's going on in the background. On February 5th, we received a letter from HCD's Proactive Housing Accountability Chief. And they basically said, since we hadn't adopted our housing element within 120 days of the original statutory deadline, and that was January 31st, 2023, any rezonings required for the town's RENA were required by January 31st of 2024. Obviously, we weren't able to accomplish that. We were focused on our housing element. So the gist is that if we haven't rezoned our sites on the adequate sites inventory, they aren't considered available for development. And so this is a big one for HCD to see that we make quick work of this, to do our necessary rezoning so that our adequate sites list is actually valid. So this is not new. We weren't shocked to get this letter. We've been aware of state deadlines the whole time we've moved through the housing element process, and the town has decided to do what has been right for it in terms of the public review process. So we've been measured about moving forward with further review, understanding what the deadlines are. So we responded on March 4th, outlining our plan for zoning code amendments. This is my slide from Planning Commission. So we began with the Planning Commission meeting. So we let them know, listen, we're on it, and this is our desired process and timeline. We didn't hear back from HCD, and not getting a response was not surprising to us, but we're pretty optimistic that the state is seeing we're moving forward in good faith. We have a plan. We are going to get the rezonings done. It's just going to take a little bit of time. And we're not the only jurisdiction that is in this position. So while I think it's fair to say, HCD is maybe keeping an eye on us, I think, again, it's not like we're not moving things forward. So moving into the actual scope of the proposed amendments, these are all of the sections that have amendments made to them. So this is what we're looking at tonight. I put little orange stars next to the chapters that I would consider have had the most work done on them. So that's the definitions chapter, single family residential district regulations, multifamily, mixed use, especially because these are our brand new zoning districts. So this is a significant change. We've also codified the affiliated housing program. Previously, the affiliated housing program lived in our previous housing elements. It wasn't actually a codified program with standards. So now we've moved that into the code. And then we've expanded our off-street parking as well. So here's our first multifamily residential district that is brand new to the town. And there's going to be two districts under this umbrella. There's the RMF4, and that's 2 to 4 dwelling units per acre. This applies to the Glen Oaks housing site on Alpine Road. And then we have RMF 20 to 23. This allows 20 to 23 dwelling units per acre. This applies to the Ladera Church affiliated housing site. And then we have our new multifamily residential district. And this establishes, continuation. This district establishes basic development standards such as density, lot width, lot coverage, footprint, height. And we have inserted some new illustrated objective design standards. And they address upper story, step backs, building articulation, facade, things like this. So these are the actual built details that you would see on a structure. And, just to re-acknowledge 23 dwelling units per acre density, and even 4 dwelling units per acre is a notable increase for the town. And we know this is significant for us. So we're trying to develop these design standards and to address these sorts of considerations of having this new type of density in town that we're previously not used to. And we're trying to anticipate what sorts of concerns we would have as a town in introducing this new density. So we also have our mixed use district. And so this is going to allow for mixed use residential developments from 4 to 6 dwelling units per acre. And this designation is limited to 4370 and 4388, which is the Willow Commons project that is currently under construction, as well as 4394 Alpine Road. These are all housing sites on our sites inventory. And we do allow for these sites to be up to 100% dedicated to residential. So here in our standards, again, basic development standards such as density, FAR, lot width, footprint, building separation, those sorts of particular details for site planning. And then we have illustrated objective design standards. And we're trying to address design for non-residential portions of the building as well. So we're looking at ceiling height and ground level transparency. So if we get a mixed use project with a commercial element, we want to have some standards in place for what that would look like. So all of the multifamily design standards will apply to the residential elements of the mixed use projects. So this is a very technical discussion, and it's a difficult one to have because in a lot of ways it's very much abstract and hypothetical because we don't have any structures like this in town really to look at and say this went well or this went poorly. So we're trying to give some guidance to commissioners and the public when thinking about technical design standards. So here we just have some examples, not to say that this is the best look for the town or not the best look for the town, but this one we're trying to frame how to think about building massing and upper story setbacks. So we are contemplating 3 stories. And so when you look at 3 stories, how do you make for a good final building product that blends into the site? And so one of the things we're looking at is having ways of minimizing the bulk of the 3rd story so that it doesn't feel as though the structure is looming over adjacent structures. So that's something to think about here. So if you look at the images that have the check marks, it's just, these are sort of general guidelines, less about colors and materials and more just about how the building is structured, that it's not one single box. So on this slide, we're looking at facade articulation and entrance standards. So what we're trying to prevent here, again, is this monolithic design. So like literally thinking of a big box or a big rectangle. That's not interesting to look at. There's no detail. And so what we're trying to do here is think about interesting ways to support the densities that we've laid out, but that in a building form that will be attractive and have the ability to blend into existing neighborhoods, or at least complement them. And we want to prevent too, the existing uses around the sites. We don't want these buildings to be looming over them, casting long shadows. So that's what we're trying to think about when we propose these design standards. I do want to go back just for a moment. Monica and I have been talking a lot throughout this process, and I want to express that we didn't just put a bunch of best practices into a draft code and call it done. We did do a lot of talking and discussing of what might look good in this town and what might fit. And staff did a lot of back and forth with Monica and Laura Russell when she was still here. We were really thoughtful about this and spent a lot of time on it. But again, it's a difficult exercise when you don't have a finished product to look at and say, yes, this is it, or no, this is wrong. So it's hard, it's a challenge to come up with these standards and say, this will do it. This is what's right for the community. But this is our best attempt. So again, one of our new chapters is the affiliated housing program, and it is currently located in the 2015 housing element, and it was administered from the housing element. So if you ever wanted to look at any kind of guidance on the program, that's where you go. It's been a long time now that there's been support for the program in the community. We've added partners. There's a lot of interest in expanding the program. And so we felt it was time to actually codify it and have the structure in place for its application. You also have a few details in there. We did have extensive discussions with our Sequoias and Christchurch partners. And so we actually do spell out the number of units that we expect on their sites in particular. And then for our off-street, bicycle parking is brand new, and then off-street parking we expanded as well. And that was to include separate standards for duplexes and multifamily dwellings, ADUs and SB9 units, as well as supportive and transitional housing. We've had to add a bit more detail into the code, and this is state requirements that we've just had to bring our code up to standard. And yes, in addition, we do have new standards for bicycle parking. So if anybody on the commission has feedback, that would be helpful for us as well. And then for, and this is just a summary. This isn't exhaustive of everything that's in the code, but this is sort of the high level items that I wanted to highlight. So we do have a number of new definitions as well. And mostly this is just to bring consistency. Any sort of new terminology we've introduced in multifamily or mixed use, we want to make sure we have clear definitions spelled out. So that takes away some of the ambiguity. If you have a developer that's actually trying to interpret our standards, the definitions are a good place to go for a developer to see how we're thinking about these things. And then we have a number of other minor modifications that we've generally had to make just to carry through multifamily and mixed use. So it's all just consistency. And then of course we have our zoning map. And I think this is a big one for us. On the left is our current zoning map. It doesn't have a legend. It's not particularly friendly to interpret. So now we've introduced color, which is great. And then we have a full, I couldn't fit it onto the page, but we have a full legend at the bottom so you can interpret it. And then also on the map, we have three of our affiliated sites, which we know to be active. And there's an overlay noted on the map for those sites. We have a number of partners. So for example, Stanford is one of our partners, but Stanford has never identified actual sites that they want to be affiliated sites. So those Stanford owned land does not show as affiliated on the map. So again, we've added color to improve readability. There's the legend. And then of course we've showed the new locations of the multifamily districts, mixed use, and our where we know it to be clear to us, we have our affiliated housing combining district, and you'll see that in hatched areas on the map. note on the opt-in diversification program, because this was coming up a lot in the lead up to our planning commission meeting. So it's not included in any kind of detail in our code amendments. That's because the opt-in program lives in the housing element. This was a practical decision, because depending on how this program plays out, the town may wish to do away with the program at the end of this 8-year housing element cycle. This is a first for us. We don't know if it's going to be successful. In our next housing element cycle, we may decide on a different approach to addressing affirmatively furthering fair housing. That's why we have this program, is to disperse housing throughout the community. So it's, again, practical decision. That's why we didn't codify it, because if we decide to do away with it, then we would have to go through a slew of zoning code amendments to remove it in the future. We do mention it in 2 places, and that's just for clarity. Number 1, if a parcel is developed under SB 9, it's considered ineligible for the opt-in program. This has been blessed by HCD, so we believe this to be a requirement that we can enforce. And then we also mention it in the off-street parking chapter to clarify that parking might be further regulated under the opt-in program. So just quickly, there's an error on this slide. We're going to be establishing objective design standards by June of next year. And then the program, our intent is to kick it off by September of next year. So we have a ways to go before that happens. We're going to have to be developing objective design standards for that program. ASCC and Planning Commission will be heavily involved for that process. Also, we've started an errata list, just tracking any little minor errors that were brought up to us already from the Planning Commission. We'll keep adding to that to make sure we don't lose track. We welcome ongoing additions from ASCC if you've spotted anything. And the public, I'm sorry. All right, so next steps. So our proposed tentative review and adoption meeting schedule. So again, Planning Commission and ASCC are going to meet jointly next week on the 3rd. Then Planning Commission would like to meet independently on the 17th, presumably as their final meeting or final review meeting. Hopefully at that time, they'll be ready to make a recommendation to Town Council. And then tentatively, we hope Town Council will be able to meet on May 8th if schedule allows, and then hopefully again on the 22nd. Because this is an ordinance, it requires 2 readings in front of Town Council. So we'll have to follow that process. So that concludes my presentation. Please let me know if you have any questions for staff. And again, Lisa's here, our consultant. So we're ready to jump into it. Thank you.
Great. I'll move on to commission questions. Rebecca, do you have questions?
A procedural question for all the errata, the typos and the definitions that aren't correct, whatever, what would be the best format to give them to you?
You can give them to me this evening, but I'll continue to accept them until we get to council.
I just feel like this meeting is going to be long as it is, so I'd rather just
Sure.
email them
Yeah, I don't think it's something that
because they're
commission
not
would.
substantive enough to be discussed.
Yeah, if it's a clear typo or editing problem, then feel free to send it my way.
So I guess my main question is, we're calling these objective standards that we're evaluating today. Does that mean that there's anticipated no plan on discretionary review for these projects? Or is that a state requirement, or what is the status of that?
Yeah, I can speak to that. First, let me introduce myself. I'm Monica Sidlick with Lisa Wise Consulting. I know you may have heard me at the Planning Commission last week, but just to introduce LWC a little bit, we're a planning and land use planning and economics and implementation firm based here in California. And we do plans and zoning updates and all kinds of planning implementation work. We've done a lot of objective design standards over the last, well, it's really just been exactly 4 years since SB 330 was signed into law at the end of 2019, effective in January of 2020. And so we're really glad to be here in Portola Valley working on objective design standards. Every community is different, and it's important that we work with the decision-making bodies and design review, planning commission and folks like yourselves to make sure that we get the standards right for every community. No, I'm sorry, the question I know had something to do with SB 330, and that's right, objective design standards. So, so this portion, pardon me, of the zoning amendments that are the standards following the basic development standards of the new zones, because the housing element requires that we have a couple new zones. And that's in your packet. But following the basic standards, the basic development standards of those new zones, we have a list of objective design standards. And if I understand right, you're asking about sort of the application of those standards. So the occasion for developing those is the adoption of SB 330, where the state tells us that whereas previously projects, residential projects, any sort of project could go before a discretionary review body, a planning commission, a design review committee, a committee like this one, and evaluate that project against, for example, the design guidelines that you have right now. As you know, those are very subjective. And so what the state is saying is that local jurisdictions can no longer deny, can no longer reject a project on the basis of anything that is subjective in nature and not quantifiable, uniformly, not easily quantifiable, and something that people wouldn't come to uniform agreement about, sort of its application. So yes, projects can go before discretionary review. Review bodies can can judge the merits of projects and how they comply with any kind of standards, subjective standards that you already have on the books, new standards. Absolutely, those projects can go before those bodies. Of course, there's a limit to the number of meetings. But what it means is the project, a residential project, can't be denied on the basis of subjective standards. You can use them to discuss, you just can't reject it because of a subjective finding. So I'm doing my best to answer your question here.
So does that just apply to these two new or three new districts? Or does it apply to everything across the board?
It applies to housing development. So anything with like 2 or more units, any housing projects, because that's what the state's interest is. The state is trying to find ways to prevent local jurisdictions from just rejecting projects
So a
in
one,
response to the statewide housing.
so
crisis.
1 acre project that has a house and an ADU would then now be subject to this new law that there would be no discretionary review?
Okay, so that is a good question for the city attorney. When SB 330 was passed, it specified housing development or housing projects that included housing units, which meant 2 or more units. Because that was a little ambiguous, HCD has since issued sort of interpretations, and there have been more than one. So does SB 330 apply to single units? That's a question I would prefer the city attorney responds to. But I can tell you that everything in our packet tonight, all of the amendments we're looking at tonight, SB 330, absolutely.
But it sounds like what I'm hearing from you is that in addition to all these objective standards by which these applications for these multifamily projects are, we could still require them to come before the ASCC for some type of evaluation. Is
Oh,
that
yeah.
correct?
Yeah, you can put conditions of approval. I mean, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a total number of no more than 5 meetings, I think is what it says. And I mean, how you use those is really, that's up to the
town.
Okay, that's
Mhm.
good to hear. Because that's definitely not in these amendments. It's definitely not in there. And as a matter of fact, under the multi-use one, it says that the non-resident one has to come before the ASCC, but the resident one doesn't. So that's something I definitely would personally like to have correct.
I agree.
And then my other, oh. At this point, I'd be happy to get one. So I guess my other kind of general question is, as I was reading through the objective standards, I'm not an architect, so possibly some of these things are obvious to the architects in the room, but I wasn't clear on some of the significance for some of the requirements. Just an example, he gave a list of allowed roof forms: hip, gable, shed or butterfly, flat or parapet. And I'm just wondering what type of roof is not allowed, mansard. I'm trying to think of, so I'm kind of unclear of why we're going into this kind of detail when I'm not sure what's not. So I don't understand the significance of some of these. So, and that's what I've heard from some of the residents in town. They just don't understand why a particular thing is put in there. So I think it would be helpful if either that's clarified today or it's actually put into the guidelines so that people actually understand why something's in there. Same thing for windows. Windows must be square, rectangular, arched. The only thing I could think of is, okay, we're not allowing circular windows. I don't understand why we're going into that detail for something that seems less important, because the more of these details that are put in here for these objective guidelines, the more time the architect and the applicant have to put into trying to make sure that they follow all of them. And then the more time planning has to go through to make sure that each of those things is checked off. So if there's things that just, to me, don't really add anything, then I don't know that they're that useful. That would be my feedback on that. And then I would want to discuss where the 42-foot height comes from. Because if I'm thinking 3 stories, I'm thinking 10-foot high ceilings, which is on the higher side, plus a foot, for the floor, the actual material to hold up the floor. I'm coming up with 33, and then you've got the roof height. So I'm just trying to understand where the 42-foot came from.
I think that, we can rephrase that in the form of a question. Where did it come from?
Yeah, I understand this came up last week as well. So what we did is we went back through all of the record of discussion and the drafts. And as you know, we began developing these a good year and a half ago or more. And one thing we talked about is the fact that this 23 dwelling unit per acre density it's the real step up in terms of density that's allowed in this town. And especially on the one site, which is applied right now, it's a fairly constrained site, right? It's the Ladera site. There's a very deep casino corridor front setback, and there's one side setback and then a significant rear setback as well. So we talked about, okay, what is a 23 dwelling unit per acre project look like? And what are some priorities that the community might have in terms of building design and amenities? And what if it's intended to be affordable housing? And so how might that look? What are some building configurations that might support that? And one thing we talked about at one point is, okay, we have parking minimum per unit, but we don't have a maximum. So maybe we want to provide more parking, especially considering that Portola Valley isn't very transit rich. So maybe we want to say, well, these are units that do have ample parking. And maybe we want them to be roomier units. We want larger units. So we thought about what if, but we don't want more than 3 stories, because we understand that that's something that the community, it may not be palatable to the community. So just brainstorming different configurations, we thought, what if, if you look to the definition section of your code, one thing that we added into that chapter is a definition of story. The code didn't previously define story. So we thought about, what if we had a configuration where you sort of go down to a largely sunken shared garage? And it's mostly underground, but not all. Some, a lot of buildings, as you know, have, say, the garage is say 9 feet or so, or 8 feet. Most of it is down. You have a driveway down, and then maybe at the top few feet are above ground. You don't consider that a story because it's mostly underground. And then let's say you have three residential levels above that, and you need 3 because let's say you want large units, and then you've got a roof form on top. Maybe it's gables and sort of roof form that's compatible with the built form in the area. Well, maybe in order to do that and really provide some flexibility for the design, maybe you have 4 feet and then another 10, or 11 and 11 and 11, and then you have some roof form. Maybe 42 is still too much. Maybe that is still just exaggerating what could really support that kind of configuration. But maybe you want to allow for that if you can affirm to the community that really it's 3 stories. So I'll tell, that's where that came from. I know a lot of people in the community are wondering, what did you have in mind with that? But really, we want to hear from you. Is that a sort of building configuration that might go in the community, that you might consider? We want to hear from you. What is right?
It's a generous plate height, 10 feet.
It's a generous plate height. Yeah, good, yeah. Mhm.
You have other questions, Rebecca? We're gonna circle back, so.
Yeah, yeah. Well, go ahead then.
Okay.
Nothing, I mean, I was just going to point out, for me, the irony of the 4 pages about signage, which was in the packet. I mean, there was 4 pages on signing and little else on architecture, on building. So I just caught my eye
Gina?
in the packet.
This is the time for questions of staff,
Okay, and I have
not comments at this time.
questions. Okay, so let me go through this. Sorry, it's gonna take me a minute.
I'll just, if I may, just
In the meantime,
respond to.
Go ahead.
Is that okay? If I just respond to Dana, it's just a bit misleading. We didn't actually do anything to the sign section other than to add in mixed use to show that signage applied to mixed use. It's all the same.
I know.
Okay,
I just
okay.
Felt that was a voluminous amount of information on signs compared to everything else.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to be clear. We didn't actually,
Yeah, I know.
nothing's new. Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, so I'll start, and sorry, I have a lot of comments, so I'm kind of going through what are staff questions versus some comments on the guidelines themselves. So on page 14, under the definition for emergency shelter, there's bridge housing mentioned, and I was just gonna ask staff if there's somewhere where that's defined, whether it could be in the definitions. That just, as I was going through everything, that just jumped out as something where I was curious where the terminology came from and if it might be possible to just clarify that.
Yeah.
Which the terminology for what?
Just bridge housing
bridge.
showing up, and it seems like it's new to the code.
So it's under the emergency shelter definition.
Mhm.
I believe that was just taken directly from state language, but I'm going to make a note of that because if it helps, we can define that.
Another thing just in the definitions, and I'll probably get to this in my comments, but just wondering if it might be helpful to have a definition for plate height. Help with, again, later comments. When getting into the multifamily district regulations, so page 32 in the packet. I think this came up at the planning commission meeting as well, but in the beginning section where it's talking about the intention. I think there were some comments about it feeling out of place, but I was wondering, I mean, is this something that could be added to the design guidelines? Or do we feel, I mean, do the design guidelines sort of cover this and that it has potentially redundancy? I guess that's the main question of why it came in here, because it feels a little bit subjective or more kind of theoretical than these enforceable guidelines that kind of play out later.
You're referring to the first paragraph?
Yeah.
Would you like staff to and consultants to jump in, kind of?
Yeah.
Question-
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, yeah.
So for,
Yeah, that's a question.
okay, okay.
If it didn't sound like.
Right, so that one, this was just for continuity with the rest of the code, as I recall. Intention, that's like a standard section at the beginning of every chapter, isn't that right?
Yeah, we just wanted to follow suit. Like, this is how the code introduces zones. We'll kind of do it the same way for the new zones.
Right, so you'll see it elsewhere in the code for existing zones. So we were just, this was just this is the style of the code, and so we weren't trying to do any major surgery. We were trying to kind of insert all of these new things with the existing code as it is, if that makes sense, to sort of conform to the structure that it is.
It's rather confusing because, you know, at one point you talk about unwarranted reductions in parcel sizes. But, you know, in the zoning, you know, in the zoning map, you know, we've got a parcel that, you know, is, you know, close to 1,000 feet long, you know, that, you know, has an average depth of, you know, of 50 to 60 feet, you know, that, you know, is on the map, you know, and it seems like, you know, that parcel, you know, if it were reduced in size, you could actually make it make more density sinks and make more of it, you know, park dedication or some other kind of, you know, other kind of use, you know, rather than zoning it, you know, as one parcel. Because if you take that 17 acres, you know, and apply, you know, the 35% coverage factor, it's an enormous number. You know, because at an acre, the coverage factor produces, you know, a 15,000 square foot coverage number. You know, and 17 times that on that parcel makes absolutely no sense at all. And, you know, as I mentioned to the planning commission, actually, that's a comment. So let me get back to, I interrupted, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Go back to your question.
Well, did you have any other response or should I move on?
You can keep going.
Okay,
Yeah, thank
all
you.
right. Okay, so on page 34, table 18.15.050 in the RMF 23 column. And I will admit, I'm still wrapping my mind around the max height and vertical height, but it's interesting because the RMF 4 has a max height and a vertical height. And I was wondering why there wasn't a vertical height for the RMF 23. And I know you have certain sites in mind for each of these zoning, new zoning districts, but just wondering if it might be beneficial to have that, you know, if in the future there's another site that gets, you know, placed in this to not have to then have a kind of redo of the code or that table.
Yeah, absolutely. So the reason we have the max height and the vertical height is sort of the same responses to the last question. We try to be as consistent as we can with your existing code, the way the standards are laid out, the way the standards are introduced. And as you know, right now, the town draws a distinction between a max height and a vertical height. And we thought, okay, that convention, that'll generally work for the new zone. No, the RMF 23, that's a big jump up in density. We thought, let's sort of start from scratch for the height regs on that zone. So we did it differently because that one site is constrained. It is true that these are zones that should be able to be applied elsewhere down the road, should the town determine that we would like to support more density in certain sites, we take that zone and apply it. So that's, I mean, that certainly is something we should all consider.
I'm just thinking if you have a 42-foot high building at the top of topography, it's certainly going to stand out more than if it's, sitting down lower. I think I'm getting a little more notes.
Could I just quickly? So for that same table, this is just a typo. The RMF 23 has a footnote number 1. That footnote refers to property development standards for 4394 Alpine Road, which is now moved into MU. So that footnote should be removed.
Acknowledge, absolutely.
Okay, going on to page 36, where there's 3 entrance types and then item 2, depth of dooryard from door. It's minimum 4 feet, maximum 10 feet. I was just wondering this was confusing to me because my reading of the code is that a dooryard is the yard area. And it seems like what you're asking is for the wall or the hedge that defines a dooryard to be set out a little bit further. And I know that's a little bit granular there, but I was just wondering what was the intent there? Because I don't think that maybe you meant to push the entire dooryard out, but maybe more so the extent of it. Or maybe you do mean that, but it wasn't clear. In the diagrams, it looks like the yard areas that sit behind the low wall or the hedging kind of go right up to the house.
I'm afraid I'm not sure exactly what the question is. Which dimension is it? Is it the dimension
So-
plan from the?
Yeah, so I guess the question is what is a dooryard? Because in my read, when I was reading the definition of it in the code, it read as the dooryard is the yard that starts at the front of the building and goes to the hedge or the low wall, that is what a dooryard is? Or is it just the wall itself and the hedge that is a dooryard, in which case then I think that section makes sense where it's saying the depth of the dooryard from the door. Anyway, it just reads a little funny and maybe I'm overthinking it, but I was just thinking maybe it could be the depth of the dooryard, just like period, or
Gina, that caught my eye too. And
There's something
also
about-
because in our town, we discourage hedges. So, I mean, that's why I kind of made a little note. We don't hedge.
Well,
Yeah,
yeah,
that is-
I kind of had a same kind of similar question between a dooryard and a stoop. Because
Okay.
it's kind of,
So
Yeah.
we define, what we do is, let's see. As a sort of general best practice, we found that it can be helpful to identify sort of we call them frontage types. We've sort of borrowed this from codes that are more, that are like form-based. And then establish parameters for key dimensions so that it is a usable space and that it reliably will create a sort of permeable frontage from the private space to the public space. So we've defined a dooryard, just dooryard, as a building entry. So it's sort of an entry design. What is the entrance? How is the entry design? The dooryard area is defined by a low wall or a perimeter or a fence or hedge that's sort of a buffer. So that might be the confusion. We're using the term dooryard. refer to the sort of entry design versus an area that you can sort of prescribe by physical boundaries. I hope that answers your question.
I think so. Um,
And if these dimensions are not right for the Portola Valley, sort of built patterns, and that's something we should discuss.
But are you anticipating that the resident might put a couple chairs out there and a table, or is that kind of the idea that it'd be a little private yard for them?
It's usable, yeah. Mhm. You don't want unusable porches that are there just because, just to put a porch, but it's not something you can use. And, ends up creating a transition between the public realm and the private space. We're sort of drawing on conventions for typical forms.
Moving on to page 37, I just had kind of a general question. The finished floor level above the sidewalk is a minimum of 18 inches, and I was wondering why that is a requirement, that it does end up pushing the buildings up, just kind of an across the board requirement.
I think it has an accessibility problem. with
Yeah.
Right.
15% of the units have to be
Mhm.
accessible at the same time.
Right, and then you're creating big ramps and other
That
things. So
one too.
anyway, just curious where that came from and then why it's being, required everywhere, because it does feel like, for a lot of houses, kind of entering at grade, keeping the bulk low, that this is a little bit counter to that.
Absolutely, point taken. In a lot of areas, we find that there's a desire to sort of create a bit of privacy from the public, the sidewalk area to residential spaces. And a lot of times there's a desire to sort of have a separation. And we understand that, yes, because of accessibility, sometimes that requires an alternate sort of a ramp area, or not all of the units can comply with that. But I understand here we understand in Portola Valley, we've got deep setback, you're not right at the sidewalk. So maybe units that are at grade and don't have that step up into the threshold, maybe it's not important. Maybe it's okay to dispense with that. We're all ears. I'm all ears.
Great. I've got a whole series of questions, so maybe I can step in from that.
Yeah, if you have some on the same page and you want to.
Not really on the same page. Mine are broader, and kind of the whys and whats. So I understand the desire and the state's focus, on creating objective standards. I'd like to know how these standards, one, support the rural character of Portola Valley. And two, examples of how these standards have actually been used and utilized, in other rural towns. Because in the preamble of the MF section, it talks about encouraging establishment, maintenance of suitable gentle density, which I don't know what gentle density means either. So that'd be another, question that needs definition. Because it's a nice sounding phrase, but I don't know what it means. The other question, and we can probably group these, but I've got a real basic question about the fair housing, because it's talked about a lot, and I haven't been able to find what the fair housing rules are about unit sizes, unit blends, and what that means. Because, as I've been looking at, some of these densities, the unit sizes get bigger than, what's on the single family residential lots for units. And so Is there an ideal unit size or unit size blend that meets, fair housing rules? So Monica, is that that's a-
Well, so, the state's requirement to affirmatively further fair housing and to demonstrate that the local jurisdiction is affirmatively furthering fair housing through its policies is a part of the housing element. So it would be best if the housing element preparers were to talk about the AFFH section. I would hesitate to really go into detail about what AFFH means in general, how Portola Valley has sort of tackled that and how that's worked into the housing element. I can tell you that one thing that came out of it is a need to create some multifamily zones and a mixed-use zone to support the site inventory and the unit count to ultimately meet the RENA. That's one part of AFFH. When it comes to unit sizes, I can't speak to that.
Wow. That's a real surprise, because you need to imagine what these buildings are gonna look like and how many people are in them. So that we can think about the amount of parking and the amount of environment, and the amount of traffic and why they need to be as big as they are versus how small they are.
I don't think RENA requires a certain size.
There's some affordability.
Affordability, for sure, yeah.
Affordability, and there's the levels of affordability, and it's also based on the size of families, and I'm not exactly sure how because literally on the MF, 23 zone, we have one half acre property, and so have there been proposed plans that describe what that looks like that we can see?
There was one comment today from actually the guy who's working on it, who's is asking a question about modular homes. So
Well,
we're talking small.
It
Very
didn't-
small.
It didn't sound like he was apprised of what the rules are. Because, as I looked at the size of that parcel, it's 188 and 140 across the front, or, 140 across the front, 148 deep, and the width, is 130 feet, at the back. And if you take the setbacks, you get an area that is about 100 by 78 to put 23 units an acre. And since they've got 5.2 acres,
No, they're 0.5.
0.52 acres, I'm sorry. Thanks for correcting that. They get 11.96 units. So I got 12 units to fit in a 7,800 square foot area. And the maximum building size, the footprint size, is 6,600 square feet. So you can't fill it up. So you end up needing to do two buildings. So then you have to have a 12-foot setback between.
We have 2 stories.
Well, but you can have 2 stories, but so you could have 2.5 stories and 3 stories and get somewhere in the neighborhood of 22,000 square feet, which would be an awful lot with a lot of people, in 12 units. So, that's close to 2,000 square foot per unit. And are they intending to apply, the density bonus for affordable housing?
We're not entirely certain what the project is ultimately going to look like. In our arena, in discussions we've had with the church, we're planning for 10 units. That's what we have in our arena. but we don't know exactly how a project will shake out.
They spoke of working with Habitat and putting modular homes that those are very small. I mean, those are like maybe 340 square foot or 500 at the most. So
I mean, I'd like to understand how this district, this MF 23 has been vetted with, example design.
Monica, I think, can speak to a little bit of the process that we went through, because we did do some site planning, some preliminary feasibility planning for the site to envision how it might look, like how a configuration could work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we chatted about this a little bit last week at the planning commission meeting. You know, we tested out different density, the densities and the site inventory went through different iterations. You know, we tried this out, we tried that out. We tested out different densities, on all of the sites in question. And the densities that we ended up with, you know, are what you see here. And we found that the site that was most constrained was that zone that you're referring to. And so, right, so we developed very schematic, simple sort of serial box site plans. Like where's the parking, how is the site accessed, what's the building envelope, how many buildings. We found that that was the trickiest, but if we have the option to put parking under, and we have 3 stories.
But
We-
how does the 6,600 square foot limit, on the size of the
what's-
building? Well, because that's the building size limit, under the, on page
ground floor,
34.
yeah.
ground floor.
That's the ground floor.
Yeah.
How does that, and how are you gonna do parking in 6,600 square feet?
I'm gonna pull this up right now. I think that was the building footprint that we fit into the resulting buildable area between the rear setback of the scenic corridor and the side setbacks.
But the whole concept of underground or below grade parking doesn't work with those kinds of limits.
Open this up.
Aside the fact that it's not affordable, underground parking would be very expensive.
It's $100,000 a unit.
We might have 2
Space.
levels above just a grade level, shared garage. That's a possibility. We're not developers, right? We can test out the standards and see sort of if the general building envelope that's allowed can support the mass that would be required to fit the density in the parking. So that's.
So you're saying that there is enough space for surface parking, adequate surface parking for 12 unit, which would be at least 24, minimum 24 spots, and more likely,
Well,
Twice that.
They've got the huge 75-foot setback. And putting it underneath the building.
but the parking could go in that 75-foot square.
Some of it can, right, yeah.
Well, all of it. It's 140 feet wide by 75 feet deep. But it has to be set back, 15 feet from the property. So that 75 feet doesn't fit 2 rows of parking anymore. There's two rows of parking takes 61 feet. It seems like, part of what we'll need to understand these rules is the examples that were tested to try to understand what the rules mean. Because as I looked at the rules, I just saw enormous amounts of floor area that there wasn't a chance that it could fit on the sites.
When you're modeling out these different scenarios, are you creating visuals or how are you doing that? Because it would be interesting to see kind of through your process, what you have been looking at. I feel like that would be really helpful for all of us.
So,
Okay.
I'm gonna wait for that invite, pop on, and then we can look at it.
Just circling back while Monica gets set up. You were asking about the affirmatively furthering fair housing, and there's an extensive chapter in the housing element about this. You're challenging me because I haven't had to look at it for a little while now. But
Is that-
very generally speaking, it's,
Can you share that page?
oh, I could, let, do you want Monica, I mean,
Why don't you, while she's looking?
okay. I'll have to bring up the chapter. I have the housing element open. But one of the things that they want is to spread a variety of housing types throughout the community. So housing types meaning for a senior that's looking to downsize and needs a smaller square footage, multi-generational living. So it's not just about affordability. It is in large part, but it's also about different types of people being able to live in the community. Whereas a large estate style single family home would not be suitable for them. And so HCD kind of challenged us to create different housing types for different types of people and their needs. Just give me a second until I can find that chapter.
And while you're looking, I've got one other question.
It's page 31
Of
of the housing plan,
the housing element?
housing element, yeah. Do we know what Ladera is planning in terms of are they planning to do seniors? Are they planning to do we know at all who they're planning to house?
The letter talked about affordable housing.
Right. But is it affordable seniors or is it affordable families? Is, you know,
So
100%. Because if it's 100%, they would be eligible for an 80% density bonus, potentially.
in RENA, we've expected 8 units, very low income to low income. So it is directed towards low income for sure, affordable. It is affordable housing. It's
So
meant to
that-
be.
So it would qualify for, for an 80%
Yeah.
bonus.
Yeah, I don't,
And it would qualify then for concessions from the town on setbacks
that's right.
and height limits
Yes.
and so does it need to be geared to get that level of density? And I know that, the jump to, the 20 unit, the density of 20 units an acre was intended to automatically qualify for affordable housing. Because it would, at 20 units an acre, it would produce at a minimum 3 units of affordable housing, per acre. So I'm flummoxing some, so.
I know the community is nervous about the application of density bonus because it's sort of this thing that we don't know what iteration it could take on a given project. So 80%, yes, it could be up to 80% if that's what the applicant decides to do.
But very easily 35%. It's pretty low lifting to get to 35.
Right. But I don't know about a best practice of writing code that presumes a worst case scenario.
I'm
Application.
not suggesting that. I'm
Just asking, working through it.
I'm asking. the question.
Yeah, I understand.
And then, the other question, was whether or not there are examples of using, incentives in the code, to incentivize better design. So that there'd be an opportunity for increases in density, increases in floor area limits, you know, elsewhere in the ordinance, in all of the R1 zoning district, there's a 5% bonus available, to properties, and projects that opt, to utilize, building designs that stay one story and stay under 18 feet, of vertical height and 24 feet of overall height. Which I think has been very successful. And it would seem to me that we should consider utilizing incentives. Is there a problem with using incentives in an objective, SB 330 context?
I think that also includes the participation of ASCC
Yes.
in a big way, in a gestational way, from the very beginning.
That's part of.
Because every single parcel in this town is utterly different.
Mhm.
And we don't know if it's going to have a reflective roof. We don't know if there's water running across the property. When we go up to the top of the hill and we see a willow growing up, we know that there's water there. Other people don't know that. So that we see the land.
Mhm.
And I think that incentivizing involves the ASCC participation in a big way.
So I guess, Monica, to come back to, my basic questions, is how are these design standards, intended, to support the rural character?
Right. So we understand the town has a very rural character, and we see that in the built form. The vast majority of the town is single family in hilly areas. And we understand that the ASCC, the Planning Commission, and the design guidelines have worked to encourage that and to keep that. So so we were charged with ensuring that we develop standards that support the density in that site inventory in the table. The units that the housing element identifies as being supportable, feasible, really are. So that's what's most important. And in doing that, we tailored the standards so that they reflect the building massing and the size and the scale to the extent we could, while still supporting the density. We looked at the built form, we looked at the design guidelines, patterns of development in the town. And tried to reflect that to the extent that we could, with still supporting the density. Now, do they fully reflect the rural character and what the ACC committee members understand is the identifiers of rural character? Well, we need to hear from you. What can they do to better reflect that character? And that's something that we would seek your input on, and we do want to hear.
Okay.
I would also like to go back to an earlier question about the standards for the 23 dwelling unit per acre site. Now, I understand we're planners and not developers. We won't be submitting any proposals for any project. What we do is make sure that the standards that we propose really are feasible, and that they can come together in a sort of at least one configuration that works, that's feasible. So I'm going to share my screen and just show you. So we looked at that site that we're talking about, and we marked out the scenic corridor. We marked out this setbacks. Now, this building footprint that you see, and we showed, how you might be able to access ground floor parking. You can see the section down here.
I mean, this is really the level of detail that it's just one potential configuration. Of course, there are infinite number of configurations that a designer could propose. But if we want to stay out of the setbacks, and use the scenic corridor for some parking, understanding that the standards require either 1 or 2 parking spaces per unit. I think it's 1 for a 0 or 1 bedroom unit and 2 or 1.5. I think it's 2 for a 2-bedroom unit. This is Commissioner War.
Yeah.
I know you questioned the 6,600 square foot footprint. I mean, that was, we drove, that was developed from this. This is less than that. It's closer to 6,000. But if we work in the building modulation that we identify in the design standards, and we meet the parking standards, if you count this is, you can't get 2 rows of parking, I recall here, because it's only, I think, 50 feet, but you could have 1 plus these. And then if you take, and you sort of do the math, the number of parking spaces per unit, it meets the standards. It meets the standards.
Mhm.
We know it works. So it's just, and we did this for, you know, the different sites. Okay, it meets the standards, the 4394. This one, it meets the standards. It does what the housing element indicates. The number of units, generally the configuration for 4370 and for 4394. So this does what the housing element says. So we know it sort of works, and it meets all of the development, the design standards. Of course, we're not showing windows here and the quality of windows, and there's details that we're not showing. We can't account for in diagrams and studies at this level of detail. But the building massing, the parking, the big moves, they came from site studies.
Is there a reason that the standards didn't anticipate floor area limits?
As a general matter of practice, we regulate non-residential area by FAR and residential area by density. Density
And
along
who-
with
who-
setbacks.
Who's we?
I would say planners, I would say LWC. Sort of typically when we work with codes, you know, we think that sort of approach regulating residential area through density, setbacks, and height.
So is it possible to actually put into those design guidelines a requirement for a certain amount of green space on these lots? And a certain amount of screening in the front? Can we put that in a design guideline? Because I would not, I mean, to fit into the rural aesthetic of Portola Valley, we really don't want to see these houses from the street. So we do need, adequate screening that isn't too close together to meet fire codes. And then we would want to create a rural atmosphere in terms of providing green space on these lots for, so people don't feel like they're in the middle of Redwood City.
Absolutely.
So the diagram that you kind of showed for Ladera's site, the anticipation was for 10 units. Was that what you have, 1 story or something?
2-story, I think.
Yes, 10 units.
1 story
No.
or 2-story,
Can't be.
3-story? I don't,
Showed 2 stories over ground level structure, ground level shared parking.
Because when I just did the calculation for what you showed based on the dimensions of the lot, I mean, I got almost over 9,000 for that building that you put there. More or less. So say 8,000 and doubled it, 2 stories, 16,000, 10 lots, 1,600 square foot per house. You know, Ladare Church can't afford that. So again, yeah. So I think the design, it seems the design guidelines really need to ensure that there is green space on this lot and it's not taken up completely on any lot that has that kind of density, that we have a sort of an objective requirement for a certain amount of green space.
If you look at the, MF 23, they're suggesting 55% in building coverage and 75% in impervious surface, which adds up to 130% of the lot. So there's no room for landscape at all.
Well, and you're heading into the Alpine Scenic Corridor.
Yeah. And to me, there needs to be, a level of preservation of natural ground and or landscape besides the setbacks.
Can you remind us what the percentage that allowed impervious coverage is for the rest of Portola Valley?
I can. On 7.5 M lots, it's 30%. 15 M, it's 26. 20 M, it's 25. 1 acre lot, it's 18%. 2 acre lots, it's 13%. It goes down. It's funny, the largest house, single building you can have in Portola Valley on a residential lot is 6,855 on a 3.5 acre lot. And they're suggesting that, on a half acre lot, you could have a 6,600 square foot building.
1 story. So we're talking 2 stories. It's now 13
Thir-
house.
13,200. And
It seems to me that if we want to encourage affordable houses, we really need to kind of do a better job of limiting what that square footage can be.
to me, it might have something to do with, establishing an average unit size for multifamily housing,
Mhm.
that can blend up for some and down for others, and arrive at a floor area that starts to create buildings and massing, that would be rural in character and still have, the affordability.
Yeah, I think the
Yeah.
housing element actually used 800, somewhere around 750, 800 square foot is the average.
Okay, so we need to look at that.
Did I miss any questions that you wanted to ask, Jean?
Yes, let me
I
go.
kind of monopolized them.
That's the thing. I did have a question, sorry, I hate to close that. So something that came up at the last ASCC meeting had to do with the lumen limit of lighting and how there was a disconnect between the current zoning code and the design guidelines. And so a question that I had on page 41, when we get into J, exterior lighting, it says exterior building lighting shall comply with section 18.36.040. And so I was wondering, I know that I don't want to open up a can of worms in here with, the fact that there is that discrepancy, but given that these are kind of standalone section, I don't want to say standalone, but they sort of encompass a lot more information within these zoning guideline sections than some of the others do, and that it has all the information gathered together. I mean, would this be a place to look into kind of righting that wrong just here, not going back and changing the code section that's in there, but rather than referencing that, going in and getting the lumen levels in step with what's in the design guidelines? Or does that just feel like too complicated with getting that figured out, but I mean, it seems like the design guideline limits are pretty straightforward. Could we just put them in here?
I think we just wouldn't want to create a contradiction from the outset. I'm going to make a note to see if there's something we can do.
So I had a question about the bicycle regulations. Is there a reason why we're dealing with that right this minute, given the urgency of everything else? It seems like it doesn't really have anything to do with the housing element, and it seems like it ought to go over to the bicycle committee. Is there some urgency for dealing with bicycles? And
There's no urgency for dealing with the bicycles. I'd say the urgency is to create a concise set of standards that leads to good, feasible, livable design. Of course, there's all kinds of details that we're not addressing in the zoning code. For example, we were just discussing unit size. I mean, we're trying to cover the basics for supporting the densities that the housing element calls for. And we understand that we're reducing somewhat the vehicular parking requirements. And because of that, as a general best practice, requiring area for bicycle parking leads to better design. It's not urgent. It is something we recommend.
I think the other element too is when you look at multifamily, you just don't have the same storage opportunities that you would with a single family lot with having sheds and garages. And so we're thinking, if we're going to end up with multiple units with bicycles and we want to figure out a way that they're properly parked and stored without creating an eyesore, so we're trying to get ahead of any potential issues that could arise from an aesthetics point of view. I think that's part of it too.
is there, I guess the timing is the issue, because it seems to me that that particular section really should be considered by the bicycle people, because I don't have any expertise for what bicycles need. And so
Okay.
Jump to page 47 under the required conditions. I think this is for the mixed use. Yeah. So in G, it says during hours when an establishment is not open for business, only security lighting, and it has, I'm gonna kind of skip ahead. It shall be of the minimum amount and intensity to achieve its intended purpose. No, that's night lighting in the building, basically. It feels really open-ended. And I was just, I don't know, it feels like, could it be more specific? Because it almost feels so vague as to not really be helpful. And, you know, people trying to determine what is that? What is the intensity? Is there some way to define that? Because it feels like it could get bright, you know, and obviously we would want to be conscious of that.
It could certainly become more objective.
Any other?
Yes, I have, this is my last question.
Okay. That's good.
Okay, so in the parking on page 63 for multifamily dwellings and duplexes, there's one parking space for each dwelling, two for each dwelling having 2 or more bedrooms. When I go back to the definitions and I look up what a dwelling is, multifamily, it says 3 or more primary dwelling units on a single lot. And so my question is, should that really read dwelling unit? Because otherwise, when you kind of trace it back to the definition, it almost reads as if a multifamily dwelling has multiple dwelling units in it, that you could have 2 parking spots, but have 14 units, just in the way that this kind of reads when you trace it back to the definition. So I'm curious because I'm assuming that's not the intent. And so I'm wondering if it should actually say dwelling unit for the parking.
We'll add units.
Please.
Okay, I'm done.
Okay. Okay. Any more questions at this time?
Actually, I did have one more in the table for the MF. Page 34, under building height, it says principal structure and then accessory structure. And I'm unclear what accessory structure means in the context of the MF4 and the MF23. I assume we're not talking about an accessory ADU dwelling unit. We're talking about a garage or a shed or something. Is that what you mean by?
Ordinance allows two more ADUs. For the home multifamily. Beyond them,
Oh. Okay.
they don't have to comply within, the setbacks. They can be within 4 feet of the site.
Oh, you're talking about the state mandated. Okay.
To answer Rebecca, we are talking about accessory structures, not ADUs.
Okay.
And that's included in the definitions too, if somebody's trying to trace the meaning.
Ready for public comment?
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
I'll open this for public comment. Since there's one public here. Yeah, Greg?
We have one hand online, but we can start in the schoolhouse.
So I can say, when I was a planning commissioner, we did talk about the Ladera site potentially asking for concessions, including reducing the setback on the scenic corridor to fit, various units in there. So just as you guys think about that. And then the other piece is I love the idea of giving, this is not me personally, not as a council member, of providing incentives to people to sort of make it more. And that one, as a council member, when we talk about opt-in, that's very much what we had in mind is we'll provide you some incentives and you'll keep it more in keeping with the sort of portfolio value standard. So I would encourage anything that you guys can find along those lines would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to hands online.
Yeah, we're gonna start with Dave Cardinal.
Hey, Dave.
Thank you. I think there's kind of a big disconnect in my mind. We as a town, good or bad, have submitted a plan to the state that, for example, we're going to put affordable housing on any number of lots. Now, Ladera Community Congregational Church is one of them. And they're, it's a congregational church. They have a little bit of money. They'd like to do some good. They're open to all ideas. And I've spoken to them about that. And we're hectoring them, I think, as if they were some sort of land baron wanting to build a Four Seasons. If we want them to do something on that lot, I think we have to be a little bit more proactive and sit down with them and say, is there a way we can help you? They don't want multi-stories. They want to save the oak trees. They want bucolic. They want no lack of park. I mean, so they're all on board, but we're not helping them by just throwing roadblocks in the way. And at the end of the day, they'll survive another century with or without us. But over no net loss, we'll have to add 10 units to somewhere else. And I'm kind of curious. We didn't talk a lot about 4370, which I think Carter can actually answer for, because I think he works for the owner of that, as to whether he can actually develop profitably under the current plan and the current zoning. And then 4394 and other lots, I think people are kind of confused about what's possible and very concerned that no one will ever build affordable housing in Portola Valley again. And I think that's the goal of many people in Portola Valley. So anyone who wants to get affordable housing built, I think needs to make sure they lay out a runway and a pathway that it is possible and not just through roadblocks. So thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Next.
Next, we have Rita.
Go ahead, Rita.
Yeah, thanks for taking my comment. Just once again, I almost stopped going to ASCC because there was hardly any meetings, and then it was pretty much my way or the highway. But I'm just really loving this discussion, and it's back to ASCC meetings, like when I was building my house, and really looking at it, and I don't feel that there's anything personal going on for any particular project, but pulling together as a community, talking about building and aesthetic guidelines with, if that's your charter, no matter what the address, and just appreciate it. And I know that if there's a client that has a piece of property, they can come here and hopefully get some answers so that they don't get into trouble and on what our town looks like. So thank you for holding the line. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Anyone else, Adrian?
I've got two more hands. Phone number ending in 7562.
Hi, good evening, Caroline Vertonghen. I really thank this committee to put their efforts forward. As you know, there's a lot of confusion, and I believe tonight there was a little more confusion. So I appreciate your expertise, your commitment to this community, knowing the general plan and everything that we're striving. I had one question is, am I wrong to think that we have one example of a multi-housing, and that is at Woodside Priory? And I hope that Carter can answer that. And I believe the problem that we experienced after it was built, it was a comment by the fire district, who has their Station 8, right across from them. And they said, well, we would not be able to help them if there was a fire, because we don't have the ladders that service that kind of height. And so that brings me to the question, where did we come to 3 levels? Can we reduce it to 2.5? And yeah, I think we have to have practical sense of what is feasible and the cost, and that needs your experience and your expertise. So I really, on the bottom of my heart, I really thank you for your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Next.
One more hand. This is Christy Corley.
Yes, thank you. I think you all are asking really good questions, and it feels good to hear the discussion, which we have not always heard. So I'm just going to start with your pictures that we see is not what I had in mind for a visual concept of multifamily and multi-use. So I would like to be a participant as a resident, as I've been collecting many pictures that I like versus that I don't like. So please reach out to the residents and include us in any discussions regarding how we visualize, not how the staff or not how even committees, but please invite us to a meeting to create the visualization of multi-use and multifamily housing, as it looks like we're going that direction. I do think that bikes are important in our planning, and I encourage you to include something regarding the bikes and include the BPTS committee in our town. I am concerned about the 42-foot building height. As we know, the space between each level is also a percentage, and the roof is an additional percentage. And correct me if I'm wrong, Carter, but where you measure from the ground is a percentage as well. So I think we should, as residents, realize that the height, you have to add all those other things to the height. And with bonus density law, we could be looking at a 33 to 50% more in the height that was given to a developer. And I could be wrong on this, so please correct me if I'm wrong. I know Ladera had a 0-foot setback with the Portola Valley property, and I am noticing a cement padding at the edge between those properties. So I do have a question about that. If it could be answered, that'd be great. And I think I am wondering, I would love to have had Mr. Biggs here and legal at the ASCC meeting, as there seems to be lots of questions regarding legal issues such as SB 330. And I do believe that the town can put its own perimeters and not only put the state perimeters on our guidelines. So I encourage the Planning Commission, the Town Council, and the ASCC to realize what our legal options are to write things properly for our town. And that's my comments. Thank you.
ASCC wouldn't be in the room had the Planning Commission not asked us to participate.
Anyone else?
That's it for hands.
Okay,
Oh, no, I'm sorry. One more. Is that okay?
yeah, please.
Greg, go ahead.
Hi, good evening, Greg Franklin. I have a request that really and a suggestion that regardless of where this process goes, I mean, this is such a substantial change to our town, and particularly the Alpine Road corridor and the lots that are under rezoning consideration before you tonight. I would encourage not only the ASCC, but the Planning Commission and the Town Council. So maybe representatives of all three of those bodies conduct a site visit with the neighborhood before you get through this process, or that it doesn't get sufficiently far along that people who attend that site visit don't have an opportunity to actually see exactly what you're proposing. And perhaps on the two lots that where you have a development application and one that is vacant, maybe you might like to suggest to the owners that they erect story poles so that as part of that site visit, the residents can get a better visualization of what's likely to be the impact of the height limits. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Anyone else?
That's everyone.
Okay. We'll move this back to the ASCC for now, to discuss some things. As a preamble to the discussion, I need to make it clear that, what I can talk about and what I can't, because of my practice, of architecture here in Portola Valley. So right now I have no conflicts associated with the majority of the zoning changes. However, I am conflicted because of the specificity of the lots and the property owners, on the MU, portion of the zoning code, because those lots are, the owners of those lots are clients of mine, and I'm working with them. And then with the inclusionary, it's not quite as clear, but one of the property owners, the Woodside Prairie School, is a client as well, and I feel conflicted on that. So I'd like to compartmentalize, our discussion of comments, around things that, maybe there might be some other conflict, but I'd like to compartmentalize, our comments so that when I leave the room, you guys can, finish. And then as a suggestion, in how to take this forward, is that we establish a subcommittee, of the commission, to collect the notes, around, our discussion tonight and coalesce them into an outline of issues that we have, with the recommended, zoning ordinance changes right now. And what we think either is a path or changes that we would want, so that that could be forwarded on and be part of the substantive, discussion for next Wednesday night's meeting. So I'm willing to volunteer, to be on that subcommittee. Because
I can volunteer as well. It's due Thursday.
Yes, the latest I can get the packet out is Friday. Earlier the better. So if you need a little extra time, you can, I'm hoping you can get it to me end of day Thursday, if possible.
yeah, the things, I'm not imagining us rewriting the code. It's identifying the issues that we have concerns about. And, what are the things that would need to be massaged, worked on, adjusted, but not what the words need to say. Because I don't think we should be wordsmiths. And I really do think that our input, should be around things that are within our purview.
Yeah.
So I don't think that we should talk about, bicycles unless we talk about bicycles as they, as they impact the site planning and the design. I think we should talk about parking, but not on what it does from a traffic standpoint, but what the impact on the site development and the design. Right? Well, same thing with, with buildings. And I do think that there's probably some conversation around whether or not more specificity or more objectivity, should be the goal. Because I find the dooryard and all the stuff and the porches and stoops and, I think those are things that go into the design guidelines, but not into the ordinance. Because I do think that there's some really good ideas. But the thing that I know, after 40 years is that ordinances don't make good design. And opinion of, what Craig was talking about and what the ordinance has done for decades now, is to provide incentives, to come and ask the ASCC for valuable incentives. And what the ASCC can then provide are opportunities for better design and better site responses, and a willingness, to waive, the 5 meeting limit, of SB, 330 in exchange for that. Because I think that'll be a way, that we can legally respond, to the state's kind of minimums, as a floor. But I think that, property owners, and developers here, are going to see the opportunity that the incentives might provide to make things better for themselves, and probably yield better sensibility. So that's kind of where I'm coming. So besides the, so maybe I'll read this off. Besides the questions that I had, that I hope we can get, answers to, on the 3rd, regarding, why we're not doing floor area limits and why we're not, following through with, kind of the way that the ordinance, on the residential side has been established in the past. I have a couple of comments, and so I want to share my screen because I did some little spreadsheet that and try to attend to, a few things. Might be too small. Damn it. I can see it.
Just walk us through.
Okay. So what this is doing, is in the, in this area, of the spreadsheet, is trying to, take the multifamily zones, of, MF4 and MF23 and use, some numbers, to try to get at, what I was trying to, explain. If the minimum lot size in these two districts was, 4,300, 43,560 square feet or 1 acre. The coverage limit of 35% and 55% would yield allowable coverage, of in the MF zone, 15,000 square feet, and in the MF 23, nearly 24,000 square feet. And if we assume, based on the ordinance as it's written, 2 stories, as the, the likely massing, or the maximum massing, doubling up, I'll end up with, 30,000 square feet of building and 5 buildings in the MF4 per acre. And if I look at, the 17 acres, that is currently, being proposed to be rezoned, that's Glen Oaks. There isn't any reduction for land that you can't use. That's in the floodplain. There isn't any reduction for slope. There isn't any reduction for weird shape, or weird, or funny setbacks. I don't know the exact amount of land that, is potentially available there, but the arena. But if it's 4 acres developable, these numbers would still go with the parcel. So, some level of adjustment, to make it have a relationship, with either the developable area, or something else. So in the 1990s, the residential zoning district, I was on the ASCC at the time. The ASCC, really saw a problem, with how big the houses were getting, because the number, the allowable number was coverage. It didn't include the second stories. It didn't include basements. It didn't include, any reduction for the steepness of the site or the unstable geology. So, we created, a way of judging how much, a site could actually support. And then, we did interpolation, between, the zoning districts. And so this area, over here in the spreadsheet is actually, the R1 zoning limits. And I'll share this with everybody, where, the allowable floor area, on a 7,500 square foot lot, is 3,019 square feet. a 15,000 square foot lot, not dissimilar to most of the lots, in, the Corte Madera area, have allowable of, 3,600 square feet. 20 M lots, which is Wyndham, is, 3,900 square feet. 1 acre lots, starts at 5,200 square feet. But then, to control the size, the maximum size of houses, there was an 85% limit, for the main house, which has done a very good job, of, keeping, home buildings small. Where in order to get, a residence, over 6,000 square feet, you really need to have, 2.5 acres. And out of that, the overall number, you have to take out your ADUs and your junior ADUs and your garage and your pool house and your barn and everything else. So, to see, the limit, of 6,600 square feet is the maximum size building, on a 1 acre site is is more than, more than half again what we would expect on a single family residence, which probably makes sense from a density standpoint. But but that's the one building. If you see 4 of those, on a 1 acre site that are 2.5 stories tall, I think that's too much to consider. I mean, what we've talked about, with, the Ladera, community church property, I think it makes total sense what they want to do. But what the limits would say, would provide them with, upwards of 22,000 square feet, and 12 units before the density bonus. And if you've got an aggressive developer, that wants to, maximize that, you'd be looking at close to 30,000 square feet, and it has to be, they're going to be asking for incentives. They're going to be asking for reductions, in the scenic corridor setback. So, and when I add the numbers of, the coverage, on the MF 23, combined with, the recommended impervious surface, of 75%, there's no lot left. There's no landscape. We need to have, a level of landscape support. And so I was, in this lower section. Suggesting a real strategic change, so that there'd be an FAR, a floor area ratio, for the square footage. So that if you stack it up or spread it out, there really isn't a change unless you keep it to 1 story less than the zoning district limit, and then there'd be a bonus. So you'd encourage, the spreading, spreading out and keeping buildings lower, which from my standpoint, is really a categorical difference, between rural character, and suburban or urban character. I know it, it conflicts with, creating higher density housing, but I think you can accomplish the unit number within these limits. So, with a 40% floor area ratio in the, RMF, 4, you could end up with a unit size, of 1,500 square feet. That'd be the average, size of units. And with the 65%, FAR, you would end up on an acre, with 28,000 square feet of building, and a unit size averaging someplace between 12 and 1,400 square feet. Which, if you start to think about the size of, of one bedroom, two bedroom, three bedroom, and four bedroom units, you know, that are, you know, within the affordable range, that's totally doable. And the reason for the, you know, RMF, you know, 23 is to make sure that there's units in the affordable range. This is not really about moderately priced housing. So I don't know exactly what the numbers, get to, you know, and I think that, you know, there needs to be some study around it. But, you know, the elements there, you know, is trying to get at it, you know, without being draconian, without being discouraging, and without overdeveloping sites. Because if I imagine, you know, a 1 acre site, you know, with nearly 60,000 square feet of building, I can't imagine, you know, well, I can imagine, but I would hate to see what that would mean. You know, a 2.5 or 3 story building, set of buildings. So I'll email this, you know, to Adrian, and then you can, you know, distribute it, you know, to the members.
Thank you.
Regarding any other, you know, changes within the ordinance, I would want to make sure that we define plate height, define general density, have floor area and height limits that match through all of the districts. I'd like to have minimum lot sizes in all the districts. Because there isn't any minimum lot size in the MF, you know, zoning district as well.
Also reading this coming Wednesday is a planning commission.
Planning commission.
So you guys are gonna meet before, I mean, I think it's really important what you just showed, go to the planning commission.
Yeah, my goal is to make sure that we get it done before distribution.
It's a joint meeting, but we're supposed to be there. Pardon? Oh, we're supposed to be there?
Yeah, yeah.
Becca, is it this one?
It's-
Can you turn your mic on?
A week from Wednesday,
No idea
not,
what we were
not this
Can you
week.
turn your microphone on?
Yeah, this coming, next week, Wednesday, the
third.
3rd.
I want to, I think that we want to emphasize, you know, the rural character, you know, and what the difference is. And I don't know what it is yet. And I don't know if, you know, how you make it in an ordinance. You know, it really is, to me, more about design guidelines. A monstrous deal, you know, is having some kind of numeric preserve, you know, for and how to describe landscape and green space, you know, both native and landscape. You know, so it isn't just setbacks. You know, and then I noticed what I think is an error in the diagram. Let's share. And it's the height limit. I agree.
It's 12, 11.
Oops, sorry. Yeah. The vertical height of these lower levels has always been judged from the natural grade, not from the floor of that lower floor. So that's a natural grade. So you're not de-incentivizing people, you know, digging into the ground. Because if you measure it this way, you disincentivize somebody actually, you know, keeping the building low.
I'm sorry, I could use a little bit of clarity on that issue. Can you repeat that? I'd like to know, I'm looking at this figure. Can you
Let me share the screen.
Thank you. What we're trying to do, if I may add on to that response right now, is be consistent with the height standards that the town currently uses. And those are here. So if we as a team are misinterpreting the existing height standards, I think,
Well, I think that this is the way the new, somebody who hasn't been here for a while has reinterpreted it. But, the dotted line of the existing grade, is the way that we measured it, so that you don't, so that you, the issue is to incentivize people to dig into the ground. And rather than de-incentivize.
so I'm sorry, you're looking at on your screen. Got it. Okay, so
Because right now you're measuring to the bottom of the, bottom of the slab of the foundation, which, is kind of depending on the geology, if you start measuring it from there, there's piers that go down. We're gonna count the piers too and the underside of the floor.
I see.
I mean, this is really about measuring what the visual impact is.
Greater grading numbers.
Well, the grading numbers get at it different.
Okay.
This is about the height limit, and the height has been, lowest to highest, which is the lowest point of contact to the highest point of the roof.
And that's the diagram on the previous page. So that's accurate.
That's accurate.
Okay, so
And the vertical height limit, is from the natural grade that was there underneath the building. Because otherwise you de-incentivize anybody from.
I see. So the two arrows on the right-hand side, the two vertical arrows on the right-hand side are accurate, and
Yeah,
the two
well-
verticals
well,
on the left-hand
I mean,
side.
the issue is if you measure it like this.
Oh, I see.
How do you deal with the basement?
I'm glad you clarified that.
Because then you would measure it to the lowest floor of the basement. And in this diagram, it actually goes below the floor.
Thank you.
So,
And do most
That correction, absolutely.
jurisdictions, I was under the impression that most jurisdictions don't actually count the basement at all, so.
well, it depends on how every jurisdiction has a different way of measuring things. In Woodside, you measure the height of the walls. And then you get a proportional increase, in the, or decrease in the amount of building, based on how tall the walls are. Which brings me to, the height limits. But 42 feet is really, really, a big jump, from 34 feet. And to me, there needs to be a comparable vertical height that goes along with that zoning district as well. So that you incentivize the kinds of behavior that dig things in, and encourage buildings to be rooted in their site. And not give a free pass, to, 10, 11, 12-foot plate heights. Because the reason for having this zoning district in the first place, is to deal with the fair housing, affirmatively moving forward, to support fair housing, and doing, condos, apartments, with 10, 11, 12-foot ceiling heights, that are 300 and 400, 3,400, 4,000, 5,000 square foot, apartments, like are down at the V, in Palo Alto, I don't think is the intention of this zoning district. I think there might be some areas, for that, with some of the opt-ins, but who knows? So, I don't know what the recommendation should be, but if we're doing affordable projects, a floor to ceiling height of 8 feet, is really pretty good. and then creating a floor and interstitial space, as much as 2 feet gives you the opportunity, to have enough structure, enough space, for all of the other stuff that goes into it, and the acoustic separation, that's required, for the SDC ratings, to have, living units on top of, other living units. There'll be some advantage, to doing townhouses, but then the separation, or row houses, the acoustic separation is then, only in the walls, not in the floors. But I think that, assuming a floor to floor height, of 10 feet, is adequate. And then providing some opportunity, for a roof structure, and the screening of mechanical equipment, because I think if we get into these smaller sites, the placement, of mechanical equipment on the ground or somewhere else on the site is going to be very problematic. So locating that, in a more distance, with more distance to the neighbors is going to improve that, giving opportunity for screening and making it feel, more rural is going to help. So, and if I'm less encouraged by, the definition of stories. And if we could move back, to more the way the current ASCC design guidelines describe how to mass things, where it's about breaking down and because I'm afraid with, creating, these step backs, we're going to get wedding cake house, wedding cake buildings, with an awful lot of living space, on the third floor, above, above the neighbors, because, the single family homes adjacent are going to be limited to, 28 feet and likely are going to have, not have living space, at that elevation. So.
Do you mind if I add
No,
something
I
to
really,
that as well?
this is really, Gina, intended to pique interest around what to do so that we can, encourage good design, that creates these really interesting multifamily buildings, that don't end up massive. And I have to say, in my opinion, they're slim to none, of the pictures that were shared, that in any way are rural.
Yeah, and I would just like to kind of reiterate your comment on plate heights. That was why I mentioned that at the beginning, that it should be part of the definitions. That was one of the first things that kind of jumped out at me, having the same reaction of the 42 feet seems really high, and that it just feels like a better method to be thinking more about plate heights. I think the other advantage is that it gives flexibility of roof form. I know this is kind of jumping topics a little bit, but that was something that stood out to me as well. I know, Rebecca, you brought it up too. Why is the roof pitch, the roof forms, why is that in there? I would ask the same question. I reviewed the diagrams really carefully. I think they're really important, and also there are kind of no other visuals that people are being provided for what these buildings might look like. Something that jumped out to me immediately was that the pitches on the diagrams aren't even in conformance with what's being asked for in the zoning code. So if you look at the figure on page 35, this idea of a third story embedded in a sloped roof form, which I think to me kind of feels like if you're going to allow 3 stories, the most kind of in step with the rural aesthetic of the community and keeping lower roof lines. I think it's a way to kind of keep a hold on the height not getting out of control. But by creating this restriction on pitch, it makes it almost impossible to develop that. So it's almost like, why do we even have it if we're going to restrict in that way? So I think that in the diagram, I pulled some of these onto my drafting board and was checking them out. The pitch in that diagram is 10 to 12. So anyway, I'm just pointing that out, that I think that probably, I would say getting rid of that restriction would be really helpful, because it would allow this creative freedom. And I think that anything that's discouraging this third story embedded in a sloped roof form is really disadvantageous. And kind of in line with that, similar with the diagram on page 36, that roof pitch is 6 and 12. So again, it's just, I think that, I mean, it seems like staff or others kind of like the look of these things. And, I think that if there's going to be diagrams, they should be fully in conformance. Even I think going into, I know this is a little thing, and maybe this is getting to something for me that I'm paying extra careful attention to, but, even the windows, put the little divided lights in them. I think these should serve as diagrams that show people what they could build. And I think in all of these, they're actually non-compliant. Maybe it's the right one. And then kind of in the world of roofs, I just wanted to point out on page 39, where the dormers, there's just a regulation for the length of individual dormers not exceeding 8 feet in length. And I think that it's not really achieving what we would want. I drew this little diagram that I just have here, but with no regulation of spacing or what percentage of facade dormers can be, you could end up with these facades that have these tons of little crazy dormers in them. And I think 8 feet actually, when you're looking at what is allowed at some point as a 65-foot length of facade, 8-foot dormers in that are actually scale-wise kind of tiny. And so one thing that I might suggest is in Atherton, for instance, they have a regulation on the percentage of facade length that dormers can occupy. And I think that that's something that might serve us better here if we're trying to kind of regulate bulk, because dormers are going to add bulk to a building, that it should be less restrictive and what the dormers actually can look like or be expressed as or be sized as, and maybe be more of a regulation of how much it can be. Because I think right now there could be some pretty unattractive and solutions that we probably would not like.
Rebecca.
So, I wanted to touch on the 42-foot height as well. In my mind, it's such a departure from what we've had in the past that if we were to allow something at 3 stories, even not 42 feet, but say 35 or 38 or something, my preference would be to embed something into the guidelines that say that 3 stories are limited to areas against a hillside or in an area with deep tree cover that's very tall, so that it's not obvious. I would not want a 3-story building sitting on top of a blank, empty field that's completely visible with, sort of dwarfing everything around it. So to me, if we do allow 3 stories, then it should sort of fit into the environment. And the Ladera site, I believe, has got a pretty steep hillside behind it. So perhaps 3 stories would work okay there. If the Ladera Church actually is interested in building at that height, which I'm not clear at all based on the letter from the manager of that project. But again, I feel like there needs to be something in there that somehow says that it needs to fit into the site. And then, in terms of the fire department. I did speak with Kim Giuliacci, who's the fire marshal, about the issue of the 42-foot height. And it turns out that Portola Valley Fire Department does not actually have ladder trucks because they're too big to fit on most of the streets in Portola Valley. So she told me that in the event of a fire, a structure fire in the town, the normal procedure is to call out to the neighboring fire departments, Menlo Park and Redwood City, to have them also come and help out with a fire. And she said, depending on the street, 42 feet would be acceptable. They would be able to deal with a 42-foot height building structure on fire if the street could handle the ladder truck coming from Redwood City or Menlo Park. So obviously Alpine Road and Portola Road would have no problem with that. But there's no way that they can get that truck up into a large proportion of Portola Valley. So if we're trying to make these guidelines to be kind of slightly broader, more general, we need to think about that in terms of the height, and we need to sit there, we need to state something to the effect that not every property can possibly have that kind of a height, because, you know, we don't have, you know, the fire department cannot handle it in large portions of the town. So I'm not sure how that fits into the guidelines, but then there needs to be some kind of restriction so that kind of height building does not, you know, the MF 23 with that kind of a height is not acceptable in
Additional street parking.
much
some-
of the
Can't get through.
right. Yes. I mean, they have a certain width of street they require without cars, and, you know, adequate turnaround, and, you know, it's a huge truck. So a lot of Portola Valley wouldn't be covered for that. Let's see. So just a sort of a general comment about the guidelines. It always is constantly referencing other parts of the code, and I can understand that because in some cases you're referencing something that's a big, long text, but in other cases it's a pretty small thing. So when you say front setback, it says see chapter 18.58, special setback line. Yes, if we were building up on Skyline Drive or Boulevard, whatever is up there, or if we're building on Portola Road, there are a lot of restrictions in terms of other conditions. But on Alpine Road, it's 75 feet. So to me, that's just a tiny little piece of 4 words. Why not just include that in the guidelines, in the regulations? Let's see. And then again, for the design guidelines, we were talking, the designs go into a lot of detail about the facades, the building facades, whether it's up to 65 feet and beyond 65 feet. It's not 100% clear to me why do we need that particular distinction, but okay. It's 1815-060. Let's see. I didn't keep my notes with
You're maybe on page 35. So it's 18, is it
35, yes. Yes, so design standards. So for the building, the facade articulation.
Yeah.
So there's a distinction between building facades up to 65 feet of length. And then there's one when a building facade is over 65 feet in length. And the main difference seemed to be that when it's really long, then we have 50 foot. You have to kind of consider the bays and 50 feet. Now, I'm a little concerned about any building that's 65 feet in length in general for Portola Valley. That, you know, that's to me not rural at all. But okay, we've got some guidelines in there that I think kind of need a little bit more thinking. But then it says the strategy, you have to also include other strategies, and, you know, for the 50 foot, for the exceeding 65 square feet, you have to divide it up into 50 feet. And then you have to either change the roof parapet, change the roof form, change the building height. And when you have a third story, it gets really complex about how it might interact with those guidelines. So I feel like it's really complex. for everybody to have to try to figure this out and to make it. I mean, I can see this happening on a street in Menlo Park, but somehow this just doesn't fit for me, the aesthetic of a rural Portola Valley.
Well, and
Home.
to attend to the issue that was brought up tonight about discouraging, somebody that, is trying to do something more modest, that it might not even be germane, but they still have this, numeric checklist, and there should be some, some place where there's, a lower level of, kind of entrance fee, that doesn't require this level of stuff.
Right, exactly. Yes.
Well, yeah, I think that the reason that we don't do this stuff, with single family homes, because Atherton does this stuff, with, their single family homes. And, in some places it works, and under, the guise of compliance, you end up with something that are pretty atrocious. And it'd be great if we could, defer back to the zoning and seeing stuff, before it's big.
Yeah, I was gonna maybe add that, kind of in line with this idea of this is really complex and kind of difficult to decipher. And given when in the process the ASCC is involved, it does feel like, thinking of affordability, if someone's creating a plan and then they're doing an entire civil plan and they're doing a landscape plan and they're coming to us with so much investment in design, and then we see it and we say, oh, you've got some of these things right, but it doesn't have the character that's desired for the community, or, something along those lines. I know that might be a little too nebulous for SB 330 in terms of feedback that we would be given, but it does feel like a hardship that would be discouraging for developers and people trying to do work in the community. So.
If I don't want to talk out of turn, but as long as we're on the subject
ahead.
of roofs, there are a couple items. I know this is one of, comment, I think it's
Rebecca.
yes. It's one of your earlier comments that I noted and neglected to respond to about the sort of menu of acceptable roof types. The intent there was, looking around the design at Portola Valley, you have very beautiful buildings, and they are rustic, and they appear as very sort of true to their form. They're not just stuff tacked on boxes, right? Like the roof forms are true roof forms. So the intent was, hey, keep doing what you're doing. Don't just have a box and slap on this false mansard roof. Or so that was what the intent is, like, do what you're doing. And if that didn't come across, we'll make sure, we'll add some language to make sure that does. And thank you, Commissioner Dixon, for your comment about the mansard roof, where you've got a story embedded in a roof. Absolutely. So we should add those lines, except when you've got a story embedded in that roof, in which case it's a mansard roof and you've got dormers, you've got something coming out of it. And it needs to be the form that it has to be to support that story of habitable space. So that is for sure an exception. And I realize this is a real departure from the standards that you have in your code. We've found that should a good design come along, it should hit the boxes. It should do this. There's nothing in here that's, whoa, we have to go out of our way to accommodate this, with the exception of, well, maybe getting the units in. Because those are the basic development standards, but they should be, and we will work to make sure that that they read this way as intuitive to good design. You want good entrances. You don't want massive facades. When it gets big, break it up a bit. So that's the intent there. But it's just a few comments. In the spirit of this being a workshop, I wanted to speak to a few of those points.
Thank you very much, Monica.
Even more than height, I mean, are things like sighting and the things that we don't have, especially on ADUs. So ASCC doesn't have the ability to comment on that anymore. And I think the ADU, the quality of ADU we're getting in town is lesser because of that. And so I don't know what we can do about that, but
I don't know. One thing that I didn't talk about so far, and I wanted to discuss with you guys is my idea about having a unit mix average limit. Is that something that, because,
What do you mean by unit mix average limit?
well, I was just trying to, I was trying to, design a floor area ratio, that would feel like it is about the right number, for kind of medium density housing. Because I don't consider this high. It's high density for Portola Valley, but if you're gonna get into high density, you need, FARs of, 1.8, to, and above, to try to get into, any kind of, real density. But, I mean, right now, in the zoning district that's closest, to the, the MF4, is someplace between, R1 7.5M, and R1 15. Because four units an acre, is about 10,000 square feet, per unit. And I guess another question for staff, would in this same vein is, why didn't we consider single family residential as, upzoning, as an opportunity to create more variety? Is there a reason that we didn't think of, it kind of, the existing single family residential as an opportunity? Because, the MF4 isn't as dense, as the R1 7.5M, which is about 6 units. There's some reason they didn't even consider that in the, because it still produces the same variety of units, and it's actually more compatible with the town, but it creates the additional house.
I want to make sure I'm understanding your question. So you're saying,
If a one acre, if a lot, a person who owns 1 acre, and divides it, into 4 lots, you get 4 units an acre,
you would have to go through the subdivision process.
or the rezoning.
You'd have to subdivide it, but both.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I mean, they still produce the number of units.
I think it's just a zone, just a rezoning, and then the units are allowed without having to do a parcel map, a subdivision. I think that's
But
sort
the
of
advantage to the property owner is that then he can sell the pieces. And it creates probably more housing, because then each lot would have 2 units, an ADU and a single family house.
I think in part it doesn't go towards the idea of changing the variety of housing types in the community. Like it's just sort of more of the same, smaller scale,
But the MF4 doesn't. I just don't think it gets there, 4 units an acre. That's 10,000 square feet of lot per unit. And
Isn't that the opt-in program?
I don't. No, MF4 is not an opt-in program.
No, but splitting your lot into 4 or 6 units is exactly the opt-in program, which we've approved.
No, except, yeah. Did you unmute him?
I'm not
Thank-
sure, I'm
thank
not
you.
sure how deep.
Thank you, David. I appreciate that. Anyway, I just, I was trying to figure out how HCD doesn't see that as, as increasing density, because it's quadrupling the density. If it was a 1 acre lot.
But it's not like for like, right? Wouldn't a single, I'm not a realtor, but wouldn't a single family home on its own plot of land be much more expensive than purchasing a unit in a multi-family building?
You're not gonna purchase it. You haven't produced any way to subdivide with the condominium. I mean, this is all assuming ownership of the property doesn't change. So it's just rentals. No, I'm actually trying to look at, because I look at this MF4 on the 17 acres of Glen Oaks as ruining a really substantial section of Portola Valley that made it what I wanted it to be when I came here 38 years ago. Well, what I don't want it to do is produce buildings that I don't want to produce, five buildings per acre. I
If
mean,
I-
because the 3,000 square foot limit, produces 5 buildings per acre. And it produces on the 1 acre, on that 4 acre parcel, it produces 100 and it produces 120,000 square feet of building.
So on that site.
I don't want, I mean, that's me personally. I think that's, and that's because there isn't any limit on the unit size. If you take that same, 4 units per acre and limit the unit size, to 1,500 square feet per unit, then you'll produce the affordable housing that you want, and it'll be small and rural in scale. Because you're not gonna, it's gonna be much smaller buildings. Fewer buildings.
So we've identified the housing element that there's up to 16 units on that site. So that is a site, and for that one instance, for that site, the housing element specifies the number of units,
But it doesn't say the size.
the size of the units.
It says that the footprint can be 35%, of the lot. So 35% of the 4 acres, so that's a lot of land, and they could be huge units.
Well,
Just
there's the creek setback and there's the scenic corridor setback and there are the side setbacks. So the resulting area is those 4 acres is, I believe, what was determined by staff and that property owner.
Yeah, but it also can be 2 stories tall.
Right.
And I can figure out how to get, 30,000 square feet, and 16 units. And that's a lot of square footage. And I think there should be a smaller size, if it's trying to be affordable housing.
Are you going to be doing all of this with planning commission?
I don't know. Well, I don't know, what the flavor of the day is gonna be.
I think we're gonna
What are we doing?
write up all this into this
I think we're
document
gonna
and then
look-
we're gonna present it to,
We're gonna write what our recommendation, and what we're hoping it means.
Yeah, you guys have a meeting and get it on paper and present it in front of the planning commission.
Gina's gonna write it.
So I,
My intro to the ASCC. and
No, you
everything.
came
I
late.
am happy
You-
to
you
help with
came-
it.
You came late, so we volunteered you.
We can have another architect.
So the other issue I kind of wanted to quickly bring up is the idea of the roof decks. And my concern about them is they should be restricted to locations where they don't look directly into another property's occupiable space or directly into windows or an adjacent residential property. So depending on what the setbacks might be,
I think we should limit them to first and second floors.
but if you're having a third floor and the third floor is required to be set back by 10 feet, that 10 feet is going to be roof deck. Just chances are high, right?
I think that's why I don't think the step back is helpful. I think that if you actually, step it back and it's inside the roof. And I hate to make that kind of draconian thing, but, because I do think on some sites that third floor roof deck could be really cool. But, you say first and second, floor only unless, approved by the ASCC.
Mhm.
Because then, then that's a Benny, from coming to the ASCC and asking for that dispensation. And it'll be because the design is so much better. Because I do think there's some sites that will be perfectly good. I mean, none that we're proposing right now, that are gonna be zoned right now. It's hard to write a zoning code, around one lot. I mean, it's really kind of the dopiest thing that,
Yes.
wonder how that's gonna be interpreted in the transcription.
quote dopey.
Carter said dopey. So, if we took that tact, on things that we feel are going to be of concern, I'm talking out loud right now. So we took that tact with things that we think, geez, we're not sure about that, is that, if we provide the opportunity, to do it with, the special consideration of the ASCC, that will actually encourage people to do better design
Mhm.
and see that as something really cool. What it doesn't do is help staff, get things pre-approved to the ASCC. And that's what I'm hoping to avoid anymore, is the pre-approval process. Because what Gina was talking about, with, the huge expense to get, all your, I's dotted and T's crossed, is a real discouragement, for developers. It's really, so they would love to have a straightforward path, but if you could, really develop a way that says, this will save you time and money, to do this, a little bit at a time, so that we can all agree on, the better design path and the better islanding of natural landscape and landscape materials and landscape areas. So you end up with, a better response.
Everyone gets a better product.
Yeah, because, I think that the Ladera Community Church, property has got some really great opportunities. And I don't think that they're in the form of, underground parking. I think that, I'm concerned about, the setbacks between buildings. I think if you ended up with an overall site, and I know I'll make all my, fire management friends worried, if you ended up with a site that is overall protected, from, fire danger coming from elsewhere, or from fire danger getting off that site, and clustered those buildings more closely, you can end up with more affordable structures, and I do think that, we need to end up with, materials that can be, affordably assembled offsite and brought here. so that it doesn't end up being, the kind of expense that, ADUs have become about, with all the fire this and fire that, and, because I don't want to go all the way to, the tiny home solutions, but there's a lot of really good ways to make a site like that, use the topography, the interesting topography that's there, because it's not flat,
Mhm.
it ramps up in the back, pretty steeply, actually.
Mhm.
And it's a smaller grouping of simpler, kind of ranch style buildings, that had, paths and walks and, between them, I think it's going to be a really much nicer response, and, in some ways, I'd really like to, to help them with the design so that, we don't end up being a barrier. Because, I think if they start looking at these rules about 65 feet of wall and this, you gotta have the, the door porch and all this, all these things, I think they're gonna go. And you have to use, a 14 by 48 building, that I can buy and get shipped to you the easiest way. And how can I group them, so that they make for these really nice, 790 square foot, 2-bedroom units.
I mean, on that same topic of affordable units, what really isn't in here at all is a requirement for a certain percentage to be affordable units in any of these new zoning requirements. So I don't know if we can include something like that, a certain minimum percentage.
Monica's lips are pursed.
We have to develop a program. It's actually a program in our housing element, to do an inclusive affordable housing fee. We don't have that set up right now. We have to deliver on that. I forget what our timeline is for that particular program. But we will be dealing with that. So I would say it'd be outside of the scope of what we're doing right now, but we will be dealing with it.
Because I mean, that to me is already that's could fall into the incentive, the higher percentage that you have, the more you get, whatever it is, especially for the future opt-in program. But, we're developing a guideline for 23 units per acre, and we have no mention of affordability in that guideline. So to me, that is very concerning. I mean, granted, we know it only applies to one site, but I can see someone coming up and saying, I want 23 acres on my property and I want to have mall luxuries, and, without any kind of specification that they have to be a certain minimum percentage of affordable. There's no requirement for them.
That's why these numbers, if we start using them elsewhere in town, they'll become luxury. And they'll meet the need for different kinds of housing. But they're not going to respond to the affordability issue at all, except for paying the inclusionary fees, so they don't have to have them.
Yeah, the issue of incentives and then affordable housing keeps coming up, and I think we do need to tease all that out. And right, so you don't currently have an inclusionary ordinance, which would set that requirement for how much of any development should be affordable.
There is in the subdivision.
Yes, that's all we have. And it doesn't generate a lot of funds. So we
Well, it
definitely,
doesn't, because there's not land to be subdivided.
right.
And there's not land that has been zoned to be subdivided. If you zoned land to be subdivided or had more land, then it would produce a lot of funds. Because if it produced funds at, at a minimum of 15% of value, depending on how you, determine value, it could produce an enormous amount.
Sure, that's a calculation that would be done separately and it wouldn't sort of figure into these standards that are in the zoning code, but rather an inclusionary study. I also like to go back to this issue of incentives that comes up. that has come up a lot. We should talk about this with the city attorneys as well, because, I mean, that, the task here is to establish standards that support these densities that we've put in the housing element. So we have to support those just flat out, without any additional incentives. Like we have to make sure, HCD is going to want to make sure these densities are supported. I understand the desire for design features and certain design features that you may want to incentivize. So then my question would be, well, would you want to allow, what is it that you would want to grant for these design measures that you have in mind? Would it be more height or more density? What would it be? Also, we want to think about the fact that there's already this incentive structure when it comes to affordable units, because we know that affordable units are a priority for the city, and the state does that. We don't do that, right? So any of these standards could be waived, and there's a whole schedule worked out for if you have this percentage, such and such percentage of this kind of affordable units, and you get so many concessions, you can waive away standards. So we'd have to think about, if we do want some sort of incentive structure, how would those two work together? And that's something we want to work with the city attorney on as well.
Is there any way to phrase the R23 zone to be, you're allowed to have whatever, 15 units on there, but if you do it, this percentage of affordability, you get 23, it goes up to 23. Therefore, it's because you're complying with the state's building, whatever that term is, where you get extra, the 80% extra. So can we just build that into the R23? The 23 is the extra 80%, whatever, the extra 80% over what's actually allowed in that lot, because the ACD wants affordable housing.
Yeah, no.
No.
But when you were doing the unit counts in the housing element, did you have a floor area per unit or not?
No.
We didn't consider I don't believe unit size was considered. I mean, there might be something in the AFFH about units that are large that support families. There might be something about, I don't know. I can't speak to that.
Yeah, I don't think we went into those specifics, but I'd have to go back through the AFFH chapter.
Yeah, I mean, I would see incentives being a slight increase in floor area, for example. If you came through the ASCC, if you put in a certain amount of affordable housing, you could have a little bit more square footage, something like that.
Does anybody else think it's weird that they didn't have a floor area number per unit?
That's me.
Why?
We typically regulate residential area by dwelling units per acre. I mean, I
A
understand.
dwelling unit that's 6 bedroom versus 1 bedroom is different. And then you just let the setbacks and height limits, create the envelope.
Yeah, especially for multi-family. I mean, I understand there's a tradition of establishing floor area for the single family areas in throughout Portola Valley. Typically, we do regulate the building bulk and massing for residential development based on density. If we were to calculate FAR, you get into establishing unit sizes. I think that's why, and we don't want to do that. They could be studios. It could be a mix of studios or units for families. It depends on the sort of how the developer works it out. That goes into space planning inside, and the zoning code just doesn't do that for residential, for multifamily residential units.
But we could.
If we pick a number that the state's already using, which is the 800 square feet. Which would give you 19,000 square feet. Per acre, basically. It should give you an FAR of 44%.
Where does the 19,000 come from?
It's 800 square feet times 22,
Oh,
and that's per acre.
Under the RMF 23.
Yeah. Well, that's the one that gives me the most target. And at 44%, if you stack it up, then that's a coverage of 22%. Which allows a lot of space on the site for landscape
mhm.
and a lot of opportunity.
Versus
For-
75%. What's the?
Well,
current,
it ends up being 70%. Well, because it's coverage instead of floor.
Well, we can
Okay.
make that recommendation, right?
Well, that's the reason I'm discussing, because I was coming up with like 40%.
I guess my,
But this would actually, be utilizing a number that pre-known, which is the 800, times the 23 units per acre.
And the developer could decide to have a bunch of 500 and a bunch of 1,200.
Or fewer, because you could do 20 units instead of 23. You want a bigger ones.
Yeah, right.
so you're creating the potential for larger multi-room units by kind of pulling square footage away from the 800 and then
Yeah.
having, it just creates that variety inherently. 'Cause you're not gonna
Flexibility.
Well,
do-
and right now, if we did this, and the developer used every square inch of his 2.5-story building, he could end up with 2,600 square foot average.
Mhm.
And that means you could have some at 5,000 and some at 500. Which I don't think is what was really intended.
Mhm.
Luxury penthouse.
What?
suites and-
Affordable.
and
Affordable.
affordable luxury penthouse suite.
30% of your income.
Yeah.
It would sell like hotcakes.
Especially with a roof deck.
Yeah.
Um,
And a roof deck on top of the roof, on top of because this also doesn't talk about, roof decks on the top of the 43 feet. 42 feet.
A lot it doesn't talk about.
So, which roof decks are not cheap. So,
mhm. I think it's an interesting idea to kind of regulate how much square footage can go into the building.
I do too.
but it wouldn't negate the number of units.
Mm.
So would you do that in lieu of trying to create an FAR percentage, or would they be?
No, this would be how I would get to the 44%.
Got it.
If they are.
Mhm.
Because that's just the numbers.
Mhm.
That's how I got to this number. And 19,000 divided by 43,000, 44%.
Mhm.
And that would start to make me feel a lot more comfortable, with the size of the buildings. And for Ladera Church, what that would mean is they would have the floor area allowed, 9,500, almost 10,000 square feet. And if you're doing 10 units, that'd be 950 square foot units. And if you start to think about, one-story buildings, because then the problem is this whole setback between buildings. You try to get 12
Right.
feet, 12 feet from everything. That becomes really problematic. The fire code says if you create an imaginary property line between two buildings, and it's more than 3 feet on each side, those walls don't have to be, rated. That's why, in a lot of suburban communities, you have 3-foot setback and 5-foot setback.
Is that changing with the current?
Well, that's not at all what's in this ordinance. But if we're trying to encourage the opportunity for a project like Ladera, that's not going to build a garage and I'm not going to build, a multi-story building, that costs them, $1,000 a square foot.
But how could one incentive I would add to this would be to add a percentage of green space to that lot, which may not, if Ladera doesn't want 2 stories, then it wouldn't apply to them. But if we prefer to have more green area on these lots, then I would prefer to have 2-story.
Well, because, if they do this amount in 10, then they need, two parking spaces for the unit and 2 guest spaces. They need, 40 parking spaces.
What's the little building that they're putting up right now?
That's
It's a
on,
little
that's on the
ADU.
church property in the county. That's to replace the ADU that was there. They actually tore one down. They replaced it.
It seems like a missed opportunity for parking and other things that could have gone in.
Well,
I don't think that the code, right, what's being written in says 2 guests. I think it's
I thought it
a
did.
guest per 3 unit or something. 1 guest parking per 3 unit.
What page is the parking table?
63.
Probably just read it.
Guest parking shall be provided in the amount of 1 space for every 3 unit or fraction thereof.
You got 2,
20 plus
so you got 20 plus
7 or something. Oh. 3,
Nine.
3
4,
or 4.
so 24. Is that going to meet the need?
I'm like,
That's what we need for parking. That'll fit in front without any parking,
without any what?
without doing any parking underneath the building.
Oh, yeah.
If it really is 10 units, they only need 24. So
I feel like we could do this all night.
Yeah. Should we kind of focus on what the next steps are for,
I have one question about just on the topic of green space and requiring some kind of a percentage. And I guess a question I have is would it vary based on whether you were providing a 1-story solution versus a 2-story solution? And I think it is an interesting thing for us to think about, just from the perspective of screening, but also screening in conjunction with the fire code overlay, because, the plan for the Ladera, like for the sample, it had relatively thin planter strips. And when you're that close to the house, what are you, or not house, but the building, what are you really able to plant there? It's not as if you could really plant trees there to help screen the building. And so it does seem like just something that better addresses meeting the goals of screening while also taking into consideration the fire code and what can and can't be placed close to a building, et cetera.
And it's in the scenic corridor, so everything has to be native.
Well, I guess the question is whether I'm viewing kind of screening as along the street. To not so much between houses or between the buildings, because we're not going to be able to put anything in the first 5 feet. And then the next feet or next 20 feet, there's pretty much restrictions as well. So yeah, the question comes up is how much screening is between the buildings versus protecting the scenic corridor from the property kind of thing.
And then kind of, and then you have this parking strip and then what's between parking and the building too, because what do you see in the
Yeah.
building? Yeah. Tricky issue. Figure it out yet.
No,
Yeah, can you just give us a number?
but I like the idea, of, if it's 1 story, you have a lower number,
Correct,
for the
right,
landscapes.
right.
Area. If you go 2-story, you end up with, a higher number for, the landscape review. Which frankly would be, in another encouragement, to make 1-story solutions. On a site that has the potential for 3 stories. If it's a nonprofit, it's one thing. They'll make a different set of decisions versus a for-profit developer. For-profit developer is going to want, what the zoning, ordinance says now is it would be limited to, to coverage, and you can build as much as you can inside of that envelope. And his mathematics are not about anything except maximizing profit. And, there's 10 units of 960 square feet a piece is pretty damn nice units. If it's a 2 or 3 bedroom,
So because we're talking about this one site, the Ladera, so I'm seeing just under 8,200 square feet where you can put a building. That's the site minus the setback, the setbacks. So we've got 10 units. Just around,
well, that's it.
8,000
Yeah.
square feet. And that's, we can't fit all the parking in the scenic corridor.
Yeah, you can, because you only need, you need 108 by 65. Yeah, and currently the zoning ordinance is talking about a 15-foot buffer in the front, which is, I don't know if that happened in the housing element or what, but it's not anywhere else in any other zone. It's not in the CC or AP. It's only the 15-foot parking buffer.
From the street.
Well, from the property line, from the street. I mean, it's going to push the parking a long way away. So 65 feet is the depth of the parking lot, in front of the others. For perspective. That gets you, comfortable parking getting in and out.
What's the width here?
I need 12 times 9 is 100 meters. And the width of the property is 130 plus. And so if you came in and came out, you can end up with 12 in the front and 12 in the back. That can be handicapped. I don't disagree with you, Craig. It's just that, we've had so little time, to meet together that, since this was noticed as a workshop, I was just trying to utilize our brain power, collectively and the staff is here. So I appreciate it because I do agree that you were probably,
Well, I think we can technology. Yeah, big time contributing. Now I think we're just trying to break out the dots. Again, just.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Because where I'm headed with this, is with, with this higher density with smaller buildings. I think we're gonna, end up with, setback issues. With, the setbacks between buildings when they multiply each other. Because this is gonna grow exponentially. And I'm trying to, so, Monica, where did the 12 feet come from? And the 15 feet come from? 15
Which-
feet from side and rear and 12 feet between buildings? Mike, that probably makes
yeah.
sense with a two-story building, but a one-story building, it doesn't make. So if we said 6 foot between buildings for one story, and 12 foot between buildings for two-story, how does that feel to you?
With the fire department? Yes.
Well, the building code allows for it, I'm sure they're gonna have issues.
Yeah, I think, so as I mentioned, we started working out the feasibility of these sites and what could go on them and the setbacks. Long ago, I know there were discussions with property owners. I know we discussed at the very outset of this project that the interior setbacks were a big priority for the community. Especially when abutting residential, but in general, maintaining those interior side and rear setbacks was just it was a big priority. And I know that at some point, as you know, in the housing element, we talk about the housing element mentions that side setback on the north side, the property owner agreed, okay, we can waive that. We can assume there will be no setback there, but it's important that we maintain the other
side.
setbacks. So these were, yeah.
Is that the church?
So it was it was a back and forth, about preserving open space, and visibility of new development from abutting properties. Aside from that, I can't give you much of a history as to where that came from. I know we also started with what are the standards for that exist there right now, given the existing zoning and similar zones. So, this is RMF 23. So looking at other residential zones, what are the setbacks that neighbors can expect? That said, I know this is a very important site, and if the property owners and the ASCC and the community would prefer to see shallower setbacks and a more developable area in the middle of the site, then, that's good information. That's something we'd want to know.
I was just going to say, Carter, to answer
ahead,
your
Jen.
question about the setbacks being suitable. I do think they're, because nothing can be easy, making it more complicated potentially, but it does feel like the setbacks would work for one-story buildings, but then if the building does get taller, that it would want to be larger just from a daylighting
Oh, for sure.
perspective. And so it, again, not to make everything into, well, if you have a one-story solution, here's your two-story solution, but I mean, maybe that is something that's worth doing because I think that works and I think it achieves what needs to be done to make single-story development possible. And then again, we're looking specifically at that one lot, but it kind of goes back to the idea of incentives or maybe just ease of development when someone's going to do a single story. And then as the building gets higher, you know, you have to space those buildings out a little bit more and create a little more daylight in between the structures.
I'd also like to respond to, I believe you asked this question about where did the building separation standards come from? You can see it's pretty high on the Glen Oak site, a little bit lower on this site. I mean, sort of the same response. You know, we looked at buildings. Oh, you know, there's the new one that's under construction right now. Just instances through the city, in the city or the town where we see multiple buildings on one site. What's the sort of spacing? What kind of elbow room can we expect? Do these buildings expect to have? And we wanted to be consistent with that to the extent that we could, while still, most importantly, of course, supporting the density that we know we need to support.
The buildings at the Willow Commons are much closer than this. They're only about 7.5 feet. You know, at their closest distances, and they're 8 to 9 feet from the property. So they're considerably closer.
They're two-story?
And they're utilizing density bonus and incentives and concessions, you know, to do that. At the same time, you know, if you go out there and walk between the buildings, it's not bad. So, both from a light and air standpoint. So, okay. So taking my lead from my comrade in arms on the council, have we gleaned enough information, you know, to start to attend to kind of our master list, starting with plate height?
I feel like that. Mhm.
So we need to, you know, create our checklist and make sure that the four of us. So how do we avoid the Brown Act problem? Or you know, two of us are going to do it, and then we'll ship it to the planning commission and to the other members, and then discuss it, you know, for consensus at the March 3rd, April 3rd.
Yeah, because if it's just a subcommittee of two, then you can work together on forming the list. What I'm struggling with a little bit from staff and consultant perspective is if we really need to get into something and work through something, we obviously won't be able to get that done for the joint meeting, but perhaps that gets clarified at the joint meeting because,
Well, the planning commission could tell us we're all wet.
right? I'm doubtful, but that'll be the meeting, of course, where these things are clarified and we say, yes, we agree, these are priorities for us or these aren't. But even still, I'm trying to think of how we get this all done in time for the final planning commission meeting.
I mean, I think we need to do this.
No, it's, I mean, so,
Well, we talked about it tonight.
yeah, I think we can, you know, develop a pretty concise list of our concerns and our potential, you know, resolution of concerns. You know, by Thursday, you know, to share at least a progress list, you know, with the planning commission, which would be a portion of, you know, what they'll discuss. with the ASCC on the 3rd. Because I do think we can attend to, the rural is, because overall, I think, my goal, at least my feeling is that, this is about making the world more responsive to our community, rather than just defaulting into, essentially a developer's envelope. Because in the way Monica was describing this, where you essentially create setback rules, and a footprint, and you can, as a developer, extrude that up into a form that meets some of these needs. And I'm looking at it as if that extrudability floor area is more limited than the concerns about, some of the objective concerns about lengths of walls and dormers and some of that kind of stuff, will probably drop it, be less problematic. The last thing that I was hoping, to attend to, and it's the reason that I scribbled, is to figure, because the new information or the insightful information that I got out of tonight's public comments, really hit home for me. Making sure that more affordable projects with smaller budgets that are less sophisticated, might be a great way, to actually get really, really, affordable housing. But we need to make it a lower bar to get to. And so some level of kind of, stepping up the complexity, as your building gets taller, as the extrusion gets bigger. That to me is going to, help make it feel more rural, and attend to those, lower budget projects. And still get to the unit counts.
If I may, just try to paraphrase a bit. What I'm hearing is for the multifamily, the new multifamily zones, what we want to do is try to take the building envelope that we would anticipate and translate that into a combination of building footprint and floor area, which is to say, limit the building.
What I'm not suggesting, Monica, is that staff and consultants work on it. I really think that, the direction and the consensus, around last week's planning commission meeting was that the ASCC would do this without much support, and do it in a way that, is trying to use our little box, because I think the thing that I got, particularly out of the comments, Gina's comments, and Rebecca's comments, is that a one-story solution, pretty simple. It is pretty easy to deal with. A two-story solution is more problematic. And a three-story solution makes us all have the heebie-jeebies. And how we get at that, between, FARs, coverage limits and height limits and building spacing, I think there's going to be kind of a sweet spot in it that kind of gets at it, and the test bed of the Ladera Community Church property might be a great way to get at, that lower hanging fruit, kind of solution. Because I do think that, it is extraordinarily challenging because of its geometry and the enormous scenic corridor setback. I hate to see another parking lot on the scenic corridor. But the way that the zoning ordinance and the Senate corridor was established, it really is, not much room for other solutions.
If I could add, I think I appreciate what you're saying in terms of who's going to do the bulk of the work and think through the intricacies of the solution. But I think staff and consultants, we need to make sure that the proposed solutions don't run afoul of SB 330 or density. Like, we just want to make sure that we can get conformance to state law and make sure that everything being proposed will work. So I'm just thinking of how to track that, but we'll have that opportunity, I think, when you turn over the subcommittee's list of comments and suggestions, and then we can kind of just double check that it's workable.
Yeah, that to me, I think is going to be a more useful use of staff time. See where we stubbed our toes. But in general, I think that, and I want to make sure that we kind of get consensus on this, is some of the special nature, of kind of the way of creating massing, and the stuff around, stoops and porches and stuff. Well, I think they're really, they're great elements, to help break down the buildings. I think they become a real stumbling block, for these lower budget projects that are likely to have very little impact already, because they're likely to be one story. And so that's, I don't know if I'm connecting the dots for everybody, but I'm trying to say that, if it's a one-story solution, it's not a big deal, to have a bunch of, objective standards, because the issues of massing are pretty limited. You agree with that, or
Well,
maybe it's gotten so late that you just don't want to listen to me anymore? And that's okay too.
I tend to default to a two-story solution because of wanting more green space in a property. But so I find it's going to be hard to get that many one-story building, a little, I don't know, duplexes you're kind of drawing there or something with spacing around each one. I think it's going to be tricky to make it
Like a little village.
a little village, but
And it's more like stuff that you'd see around small community college out in the Midwest. Not trying to make affordable housing. Students.
But I want to kind of avoid having it look like a little trailer park, which starts to start.
Nicely colored trailer park.
In the incentive program, we always used to say that a well-designed building doesn't need a whole lot of screening. So, if they're fabulous, you don't need to hire a long shot.
Go ahead, Jean.
Yeah, I guess just thinking about these more enforceable guidelines, which I do agree, they become really complicated. My question to staff would be, if we have nothing and then it's more discretionary, how does that interface with SB 330? And I'm assuming, I mean, it sounds like they're in there because of that. And so I guess it might be helpful for us to understand that, before proposing that a lot of this does get taken out. And I know there's things that could be modified with them, et cetera, but anyway, I guess I'm curious about.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question. You can go through discretionary review, absolutely, and tell them what you'd like, tell the applicant what you'd like to see. But SB 330 protects the applicant from, I mean, yeah, like you just can't say no, basically. So what we think of, we sometimes think about objective design standards as, okay, imagine the applicant comes in and is going through discretionary design review. And imagine, the kinds of things you see. imagine it's something that, you'd like to approve it, but you can't because it just doesn't measure up in this way and that way and that way. Like, what is it that you don't like about it? This imaginary project that comes in, what is it that you don't like about it? What we have to do is we have to imagine, what are the things that you see that you don't like, that that you'd like to see these applicants to demonstrate. So we put our finger on that and we write it down. So imagine it goes through discussionary review. What do you tell them? Well, we'd really like it to have more, whatever, less building separation, whatever, or more, or we'd like the roof to be, to demonstrate this or that style, or we'd like there to be an entry feature where you can sit on your porch or your stoop, or we'd like there to be what is it? What do you say to them? Like, what do you say in the discretionary review? Well, then we hear that and we write it down, and then they know what to comply with. I hope that answers your question. I mean, I think it's a really good one. Like, why can't we just go through discretionary review? I mean, that's what SB 330. You just can't reject it. They can say, well, like, I was denied on the basis of subjective standards or findings, and that's,
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to the expense of that in hand with trying to do affordable housing. But the preparation to get to the stuff.
yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. Understood. Thank you.
So the objective design are essentially protecting us as a town from having something outrageous get proposed.
Yes.
And it gives in theory, the applicant more assurance about what they have to prepare and what standards they have to meet, as opposed to this sort of
Nebulous.
subjective, abyss of what are they going to ask us for? We don't know. And then then they might end up designing on the fly a little bit more instead of coming in more prepared. So this is such an interesting discussion because, I was thinking to myself, this is the perfect opportunity for EV to have local control and to just lay it out like, this is what we want and we don't want that. You know what I mean? But as we've gone through the discussion, and you guys have pointed out at different points, actually to be this specific is kind of limiting and it might impact affordable housing development. We don't want that. So it's a really interesting tension between grabbing the control, like the bird in the hand, you know what I mean? But not going too far in that direction. So.
And we see this, architects chafe at standards. Like, I know how to design. You don't have to tell me how to do it. Like, I completely get that. Yeah.
Yeah, I can feel it.
I just have a quick question because we've been here for I've been here for 3 hours. You guys have been here for 3.5 hours. Can I take a restroom break?
I think,
Or could we, I mean, I don't know how much longer it takes to kind of wrap things up, or I don't want to force that, but I would love to be able to.
I think we're finished except for the
Okay.
minutes.
We do have minutes and we'll have to take public comment. So I don't know if you want to take like a 5-minute break.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Let's do
I
5
just want
minutes.
some water.
Yeah, we were close to that already.
Right over.
Yes.
Over there.
Little building. I know the one right up.
So I'll call this meeting back to order. So the status of our conversation is, to resolve our issues, assign a subcommittee with the goal of, producing that right, this week, Thursday. Utilizing the discussion tonight in a sense of consensus that I think we have, to make a report to the planning commission. So from a subcommittee standpoint, Rebecca, you said you wanted to volunteer. Did you want to do it? Jenna?
I'm happy to just have you two just to take a cook out of the kitchen and make it more efficient, but
Okay.
Only if you guys felt you wanted an extra person.
You can't have.
We
another.
can't have an extra. person.
Oh,
Yeah,
no, then you two,
It can
go
only
ahead.
be two.
Yeah.
So, Okay. And, so Rebecca, you and I will work that out. So as far as discussion on this item is concerned, do we all feel, comfortable with where we're at? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so Rebecca, you have to make the motion.
I make a motion that the ASCC form a subcommittee of Commissioner Flynn and Chair War to write up our discussion on the planning amendments, on the zoning amendments, to be provided to the planning department by Thursday.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
I
Motion carries 4-0. Okay. Want to deal with the minutes at this point? Okay, I'll open the minutes for public comment. Anyone want to talk to us about the minutes?
So far, no hands that I can see.
I'll close the public comment period on,
I'm sorry, one just went up.
okay.
Okay. Christie, go ahead.
Go ahead, Christie.
Faster to unmute. Your hands down. It's okay. You can go ahead.
Okay. Discussion of the minutes?
I read them. We're fine. There were a bunch of name typos, but other than that, I thought the minutes were good.
they seemed accurate except for Dana's name.
And John Diggs is Jon, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Would you like me to make those corrections prior to posting?
Move to approve.
Okay. Is there a second?
A second.
All in favor?
I
Aye.
I don't think I was part of the meeting, so
You can abstain.
Abstain.
Abstaining.
One abstention. Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you very much. Move to adjourn the meeting.
second.
I think, sorry,
Have
I'm
any
just,
other
I'm just,
business?
I did, yes, yeah, with Adrian. Right above
Um,
here.
we do have item number 3 is commissioner, rather, I guess we skipped over commission reports and staff report.
I think
but
we had
that's fine.
enough discussion.
That's fine. If you guys are all satisfied, that's no problem. Okay. All right. If you'd like to proceed with adjournment.
I move adjourn. We adjourned at 5
Right.
minutes to 10.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for your patience.
Thank you.